Councilmember Aslan, would you?
I'd be happy to do so. The Flagstaff City Council humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous peoples. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home.
Thank you for that. Now moving on to agenda item number 4, Capital Projects Retreat. Take it away, whoever is taking it away.
Good morning, everybody. Greg Clifton here, your city manager, coming to you from Fountain Hills. And I wish I was there, but it's good to see you all virtually. I am always just amazed as to how we can do these meetings from different locations. It's just a wonderful thing. This morning, I would like to kick things off first by introducing our facilitator and then second by offering some prefatory comments to today's discussion. I think at the very start, I want to thank you, all of you. This retreat is one that's been added on to the schedule. Our budget retreat schedule is a busy one, but we have added a half-day retreat to that already busy schedule, and I want to thank you for your time. I especially want to thank our staff for the preparation going into this. I can tell you firsthand there's been a lot of preparation. I'll single out Rick Barrett and the team over there in capital projects, but all divisions have had involvement in this. I also want to give great thanks to our elected officials for once again taking time, valuable time, to spend with us and having this very important dialogue. As I see today's retreat, it's going to set the stage in a way for the April retreat. This is a retreat to talk about a retreat, if you will, but it will enable us to check the box on a very important component within the budget process, and that is our capital plan. You know, every year our budgets are annual in nature, but they are not that way in scope. We are always looking ahead, and we frequently look behind. It's a journey that we're on, and the budget, even though it represents a little single point in time, is really much more than that. So that is the context of today's discussion. A little bit more on that later. Our facilitator has been with us before. Katie Vitikin is a wonderful facilitator, and she's quite familiar with this group, and we are pleased and honored to have her again today. Katie received her Master's of Applied Positive Psychology from the University of Pennsylvania. She's a certified coach out of Stanford University. She's a nonprofit president. She's a life coach. She's a university lecturer. She's a consultant. She's a facilitator. She's a public speaker. She's a writer. And she's a certified wellness professional. She wears many hats. Katie combines the science of positive psychology, design thinking, and habitat research for a truly innovative approach to organizational and individual change. She facilitates on creating the desired company culture, leadership communication, team building, and psychological safety, empowering us to know how to create desired change within our organizations. With all those skill sets, Katie comes to us today to help us in facilitating this important retreat. Katie, good morning to you. I'm not looking at the room at the moment, but I know you're there, and it's so good to have you. And in a minute or two, I will be turning things over to you. And thank you, Katie. If I was to Well, first things, how we conduct these retreats. These are the rules of engagement that we usually speak to at the beginning of every retreat. And I say rules of engagement with quotations because we don't operate with hard and fast rules today. It's the retreat format is one that's a little bit more informal and one that promotes dialogue and exchange and idea sharing. Like our work sessions, it is not a place for formal action. So we're looking for nods of heads and not necessarily motions and votes. It will give us some direction on some important things, and I think it will help, as I mentioned earlier, set the stage for the next budget retreat toward the end of April. Today, we are focusing on the 5-year plan. And the 5-year plan, as I made reference to earlier, is bringing us out into the future a bit. We have to have clarity on this 5-year plan in order to effectively budget for the present. Many of the projects, programs and projects, although today, you know, a good deal of the discussion will be project centric, but many of these do not start and end in a singular year. Some of them are ongoing in nature. Some of our larger projects require multiple years to complete. The Rio de Flag project, as one example, has been on the planning table for decades. And we are marching along on that project, and it will be years before it comes to completion. Very important projects for the community that span a long period of time. And that underscores the importance of the 5-year plan. Underlying all of these plans, of course, is the allocation of taxpayer dollars and the allocation of staff resources and consultant resources and a myriad of other resources that are necessary for these important projects. And we're always seeking at the front end for council consensus. These the 5-year plan, we'll talk about it at a high level today, but you're going to see council a lot of stuff. And we know that you'll want to talk about some of these projects. It's important to inform the discussion, to be aware of everything that's in the queue. Because of what I just stated, because underlying these projects and programs is a lot of resource allocation and taxpayer dollars underlying all of that. So we need to be mindful that we are really talking about the expenditure of public monies here into the future, and we take very careful thought in doing so, thought and preparation. With that in mind, the presentation coming to you today, a very thoughtful one and one that has already been rehearsed a couple of times, will involve a format largely. It might look slightly different from one presentation to the other, from each division to the other, but you will, council, be hearing about the color of money. That's a term we use to describe the funding allocations from the specific buckets of money, many of which cannot be transferred from one to another. It's a very important component of this discussion. You'll also be hearing about what the current budget allocation is and how we carry over those allocations from one year to the next. And looking ahead for allocations that have not yet occurred, we talk about programmed revenue that will eventually become a budget appropriation. We want to all be mindful at the staff level of council questions and comments and concerns as it relates to these projects. We will have opportunity for questions, I think, at the end of each discussion item. So we'll be going through these rather methodically, and council, we would invite the dialogue component of this retreat to occur kind of at the end of each one so we can get through them. And this will allow for ongoing discussion when it's appropriate. I think we can also be a little bit nimble, and if there are questions that need to be asked on the fly for clarity and so forth, we can do that. Again, the rules of engagement are not set in stone here. That said, we have a lot of content today, and we're under time constraints, and our facilitator is going to keep us on time and on task. So we are thankful for Katie's assistance in that regard. Finally, I'd like to preface the comments about the capital project by noting some obvious constraints and some that might not be so obvious. As we're looking ahead over 5 years in this instance to talk about our projects, we always need to be mindful of resource constraints. Topping that list of late would be inflation. We are seeing projects right now escalate rapidly in cost, and in fact, a scarcity of resources in some instances, which is in turn creating inflation, a very important consideration as we go forward. And with the Citizen Bond Committee, I'll share with you some of the projects that were discussed in front of that group. Talked about annual inflation rates of upward near 20%, which is shocking. But we need to be mindful that these factors are on the table as we talk about these projects. Time is of the essence with many of these projects, and if we delay, we will necessarily see significantly increased costs. That is the landscape we are currently in. Policy impacts. There's been a lot of discussion on that, and some of that is driving the presentation today. Council serves as our policy maker. We as council implement that policy, but we do need to be mindful that policy is never an event that happens at a single point in time. It is an evolving event that spans a continuum of time. The policies that we are operating under today are the product of many, many discussions by many, many city councils in the past. We give deference to those decisions, and we recognize that it's never a static thing. The policies are evolving, and we're having a lot of evolution of our policies currently, which is a good thing. So with that in mind, we just need to be aware of those, of that principle, that policy change is always dynamic. But when we're endeavoring to put projects together, we need to have assumptions that we can rely on. And sometimes in the landscape of a rapidly shifting policy, that becomes a bit of a challenge. And in turn, will create some additional time and cost. Just something to be aware of. There are also the contractual obligations that we operate under. Grant obligations are a prime example of that. They spell out sometimes with specificity what the scope of our project involves, and we cannot always deviate from that. If we do so, we do so at the risk of violating the terms of the grant or the appropriation or whatever funding source that might be on the table. Similarly, we do a lot of these projects in conjunction with other partners, our IGAs, our legal settlements, our development impacts. All these partnership commitments are legally binding, and our attorneys do a great job of giving us advisements. This is happening as we speak as to what we can do within the parameters of these legally obligating instruments. So I think I'll end it with that. Oh, no, I wanted to add one more thing to that list. I forgot to reference something that's very important, and that is voter-approved bonds and voter-approved expenditures. Bonds top that list. And with that, an obligation to continue to respect and cultivate the trust of our voters in these projects that have been approved. We talk about this a lot with the council, and it's something we always need to be mindful of. Okay, I have 25 minutes after the hour, Katie. Thank you for allowing me to set the stage for today's discussion, and I'm going to turn it back to you at this time, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you.
City Manager. This is Mayor Daisy here.
Good morning, Mayor.
Morning. I didn't want to interrupt you. I logged on about 8:15. I apologize. Our other retreats had started at 8:30, and I also have a drop-off line starts at 8:15 for my kids' preschool. So my apologies for being late, but just wanted to chime in to let everyone know I am here and will soon be arriving in person.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And we knew that you would be arriving a little bit late, and we just went ahead and get started. I made the decision at the front end that as we're going through these introductory items, that would afford you some time to come in and then share your presence with us. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And thank you, City Manager Clifton, for that wonderful introduction and timeliness. So as he said, part of my role today is to keep us on schedule. So just two things about that. In order to help promote us staying on schedule, if you're presenting some slides, I'm going to give you a 2-minute warning by just holding up 2 fingers. And then I'm going to give you a 1-minute warning by holding up 1 finger to help us stay on track. The other part that he mentioned is ensuring that we have an inclusive discussion. So that might mean that I might ask for opinions of people in the room specifically on a topic to make sure that we're getting a wide variety of perspectives. And I just want to say that I'm really grateful to be here to be part of this process, because everyone in this room and online is here for the same reason. We care about supporting our community, not just to allow them to survive, but to thrive. Every one of these things you're going to discuss today is imperative and part of that support that enables our community and its members to thrive. So thank you for allowing me to be part of that process. And to get us started, Rick Tatter, would you mind coming up and giving us started on your general government presentation?
All right, good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, City Council, Rick Tatter, Management Service Director and City Treasurer for the City of Flagstaff. I'm going to go over a group of funds that we generally term as general government type capital improvement projects. The list is here on your screen, but just as a note, if you're following along in the agenda PDF packet, the list of projects begin on page 86 of the agenda PDF of the capital improvement plans, or on your hard copies here is page 1 of your printed page here in this setting. So general government consists of several funds that generally do not have a managed capital improvement program in these. So we kind of group these together as just general government. You see the names listed there. I'm not going to go through them all. We'll talk about some of these as we go through examples or current projects that we are working on in our general government area. I was chosen to walk through these, but we do have several divisions and staff ready to talk about the details of the projects if council does have questions at the end of the presentation. So I look forward to their support as we go through here. I'm just kind of delivering the oversight at this point. If we can go to the next page. Starting off with the general fund. As we know, general fund is pretty much an unrestricted revenue fund for government operations. For the most part, we do have some restricted funds, such as court fees that are restricted for court use and that kind of things. But primarily, they're available for government operations and can be used to support entire organization in projects and so forth. Generally, the general fund supports several divisions within it, such as IT, parks, fire, police, and so forth. Those types of operating funds that don't have necessarily a separate revenue stream to support them, but they group in our general fund as operation. As far as the capital improvement plan, as I mentioned, really consists of projects that are adopted in a budget process. We really don't do a long-term CIP in our general fund. So you don't see any long-term projects listed here. Often the large projects are those that we look for ballot measure supports, such as our fire facilities, expansions of parks, and those kind of things. We generally look for the secondary property tax and geo bonds to build the structure, and then they get maintained by our general fund. We do have funds for repair and replacement, but those are not considered capital improvement programs. We do want to make sure we're maintaining our facilities and fleets and so forth. So that's the general fund in the color of money and capital improvement projects. So a couple highlights to go over. Currently in our CIP for the general fund, we do have a fiber, $2 million in the current budget. This is a program for potential grants that we may proceed, or even public-private partnerships that we may go into. We have funded from the city side. There is actually $600,000 set aside for the city side to help match and move programs forward. The rest would be a grant match or a contribution. The slide says 600 or 400,000, but the number is 600,000. I calculated that last night and found the correction. So just as informational. Currently, we have been working in partnership with a grant opportunity that's submitted We're looking to hear on that in June of this year. If we do not get that approved, we'll look at other public-private opportunities if that grant is not awarded. Currently, we show interest in 5 vendors or companies that are interested in coming to Flagstaff with broadband and fiber in our community, which is a great news to hear. And our IT director, CJ Perry, is working hard and working with them and having those conversations. As you're aware, we do have a broadband master plan. The link is here on your screen if you'd like to visit that page and see the current progress and what we anticipate in the future. And then just one last note, in addition to the $2 million we had set aside, council directed to spend $1 million on broadband from the American Rescue Plan Act funding. So those monies are also available now within our IT fiber and broadband projects. Next slide. The West Side Park is currently in the general fund at $1.5 million. This is a new development of a park on city-owned property up in Boulder Point. We've had some budget conversations on this recently, and we have identified all the funding sources to make the $1.5 million happen. $370,000 will be coming from the general fund, while $1.13 million is from our BBB tax revenues. So the current status is we will be carrying this forward. We weren't sure of the funding at the time, but now that we do have that, we will carry this forward and work on this in the coming year. The impacts and program insights on this is that we will start the conversations and start re-energizing the project about how do we get access to the property. We'll start performing neighborhood outreach to assure we're developing a part within what that community would like to see and start a design phase in the coming year. We hope to have a concept plan delivered within an 18-month period. And from our commission standpoint, this is one of the priority projects that they'd like to see get done, hopefully in the next year or so, and it's part of the master plan. We are looking to meet national standards while we develop these types of parks to have a 10-minute walk to over 500 residents when we put this park in place. Next slide. The next item is a Red Gap Ranch photovoltaic soil testing and cultural survey. This current year, the city of Flagstaff, the general fund invested $350,000 to help support maybe future plans for the Red Gap Ranch and carbon neutrality. And we're looking to do studies and surveys of the cultural area within Red Gap Ranch to ensure we have a good baseline of information before we start planning out and put in some capital projects out in that area. So as mentioned, this is $350,000 from the general fund, although it's budgeted in the sustainability fund. We're currently active with this and talking with our utilities about connecting with whether solar or such, and we'll keep our progress on this in the coming year. This may also be a carryover in this next fiscal year. So those were the general fund highlights. Now I'm going to talk about library fund a little bit. Library fund color money is a restricted fund for library purposes. These revenues primarily come from a secondary property tax that the county collects on the tax bill. But we receive the monies through an intergovernmental agreement with the Coconino County to deliver the services for not only our local libraries, but other libraries within our counties. The general fund also supports the operation of our local libraries only. We do provide funding to support those local branches. Within the capital improvement plans, again, this is one of those areas where we basically try and plan and put in projects as we have the funding for them. We don't really have a long-range plan for library projects, capital improvement projects at this time. Next slide. a couple big highlights for the library. Over the last several years, we were able to get the roof replacements done, but now we're moving on to window replacements, taking care of a much needed infrastructure of the windows within our downtown libraries. We're investing about $1 million into that project. And this is 100% funding coming from the library district tax. The current status is we are in design and discussions with Love and Contracting to look at the windows at the library. And we're looking to get the architectural reports and specifications later this year, well, next month, April 2022. So that's exciting to get those investments done for our very much needed infrastructure. And then the other library, just as a note, is the front entry improvements. There's multiple funding sources on this. I'm not going to talk about it here. We're going to talk about it later in today's conversation. But the library is part of that contribution to the ADA access ramps at the library. Next item is our parking district funds. This is collection of parking fees and permits, and this was restricted for the parking program. Really consists of projects adopted through the budget process with small exceptions. We are required to put 20% in reserve of our fees to fund future acquisitions of parking spaces for our downtown area. So really, the only item there currently is that set aside for those future items and investments in our parking opportunities. And next slide is our last slide here. Two items here. These are capital project funds, either bond funds or non-bond funds. Two projects, USGS. We came to you last fall to talk about the USGS campus. This was voter approved several years back, and we were unsuccessful with delivering this time, but we're going to carry this fund over for a couple years and wait for the GSA, Government Services Administration, to reissue an RFP to build up on a USGS campus. And the last item is our courthouse project. We have about $4 million budgeted in this category, but really we have about $1.9 million is currently set aside for additional parking. We've gone through the project of building the courthouse, but we know we want to deliver additional parking at the courthouse. And now that we got the old courthouse demolished and new parking in place, which is great, we're taking a focus on expanding parking, and we're looking at partnership with an agency possibly north of the courthouse. The total project was currently estimated about $5.5 million. We know construction costs are going up, so we have about $2 million of that funded, but we'll keep on that. It may be a financing opportunity to make sure we deliver these projects for about 96 spaces. And so with that, I've gone through all the general government items, and we'll open it for council comments or questions.
I can just jump in really quick.
Okay.
Councilmember Shimoni does have a comment that he would like to offer,
Okay.
if he could.
Thank you, Stacy, and good morning, everybody. I wanted to offer an opening comment prior to really diving into this retreat and express gratitude to the whole team, to you, City Manager, to Rick, and both Ricks, and just everyone who's on this call and the council for taking the time to have this retreat. I think this is so important. And, often at our council budget retreats, we're on such a strict time schedule that we don't always have time to really dive into some of these bigger topics. And I just want to express gratitude for the time that we're taking today to have this conversation. I think at times, we try to plan 20 years out for our community. And just given how much is changing, I just think it's really healthy that we are able to be nimble and to be, able to make adjustments as we go and not just be on a strict timeline for 20 years. and so I think it's really healthy for us to have these types of conversations, whether it's once a year, once every 2 years, however often the council and city manager and team feel it is needed to be, needed. I just wanted to say, an opening to this conversation today that, a couple of my goals is that we really look at how we can better align our efforts to the regional plan and have more accountability, both to how things get onto this list of capital projects, and then also how those projects are fulfilled. And I'm really looking forward to that conversation later today. But I just wanted to state that up front and express gratitude to everybody and say that I'm looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you, Council Member Shimoni. And are there any other questions? Yes, Councilmember McCarthy.
Well, my first question is, can the people online hear me speaking from here, or should I go by that mic? All right, I get it. Thumbs up from Adam. Thank you, Adam. Going back to one of the first general fund slides, I see where it says ARPA non-federal funding. What does it mean by non-federal funding? I thought ARPA was federal.
So as we had a conversation with council at the February retreat.
Oh, I wasn't listening?
No, there's a lot of details to this. The guidelines for the American Rescue Plan Act came out in final, and they allowed cities to use up to 10 million in revenue loss without going through the difficult process of documenting. And so we chose that option of saying, yes, we're going to take 10 million in revenue loss recognition, but that allowed us to move those projects to a non-federal funded source versus a federal funding source. And the benefit is we don't have to follow all the strict federal guidelines of ARPA, but we can still deliver the projects that council and directed staff to bring to our community through our process of budgeting and delivering these projects, tracking them, and bring those forward. So that's why it was from the ARPA conversation, but they're non-federal dollars. They're kind of cleaned to a spot where it's unrestricted.
Okay. My second related question is, so we could use those for a lot of different things. They're pretty much unrestricted. Is that true? Yeah.
Yes, we've got direction from council that they want to invest in the broadband technology, the 1.5. So we're going to keep focusing on that.
Okay, so I guess where my mind is, and I'm only one guy up here, is there seem to be some other projects that the bond committee is talking about that are absolutely critical. Like some of the police and fire department needs new radios and things. I'm just wondering out loud if it would make more sense to use that money for some of those things that we absolutely need and not have to go to the taxpayers to increase their secondary property tax or keep it higher, depending on how you want to frame it, instead of using it for this. I guess what the real question is, what's the higher priority? Is the higher priority funding, as an example, the new radios for the police and fire department, as opposed to using it as is outlined here? So that's what's going through my mind. I'd be interested in your comments and the other council members.
I hope, we remember how long it took to decide how that money would be allocated previously in discussions, and then we had multiple council meetings regarding how that money would be spent. I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea, but I do feel that conversation with the ARPA funds led to really good results regarding what ended up being 2.3 million for housing, 1.5 for broadband, 600,000, I believe, for or so for business grants, etc. So I don't mind opening that up, but maybe we should save that for another discussion and make sure we have 3 council members willing to revisit the issue that we've already decided.
In addition to that, we will be talking about some priorities later in the day, so it might be helpful to go through some of the bigger picture things all the way through so that we can then start thinking about some of the priorities.
Maybe we can come back to this, but I guess the big picture in my mind is there's been recent discussions about, at the bond committee of things that we need to get more tax money from the public. And it might make sense to revisit monies that we already have to pay for high priority things that the voters may or may not agree that we need to fund. So I guess I'll leave that at that, but I do have one other unrelated question.
I guess if I could stop, get direction if there's 4 or more in council that want to bring this back to an April retreat for a conversation, but we're kind of off topic with CIP, I guess, when we talk about the ARPA funds. We weren't prepared for that as part of today's conversation.
Well, I would like to bring it back. I don't know if there's anybody else on council. If not, I'll move on to my next minor little question.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, I'll just say let's get through the retreat first on capital improvements, and then we can maybe have that discussion later or have that added to next Tuesday's agenda to see if there's a direction on that.
Okay, I'll ask another quickie question, which the library windows, I guess I'd like to see some justification, and it's probably there, but I haven't seen it, of why we need new windows in the library at the tune of $1 million. I mean, with that much money, I think maybe someone, and maybe this isn't the time for it, but I'll accept that. But I would like to kind of hear, why do we need new windows? And it's probably justified, but I haven't
They're
heard.
not in good shape, but Heidi Hansen has raised her hand.
So,
Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, Council members. Heidi Hansen, Interim Deputy City Manager. That's a great question, Councilmember McCarthy. This has been an issue for several years. We actually have windows that are leaking into the building, and we have luckily not had mold beginning, but we have definitely are having lots of leaks into the window. We also have found that it is interrupting the heating of the building as well as the air conditioning of the building. So this is something that has been going on for several years, and we really do need to take care of it. There are so many windows, and I apologize, Jared Tolman, our library director, is on vacation this week. He could probably rattle off how many. These are custom windows. These aren't something that are easy to just to buy at a Home Depot and install them. So that is part of the project as well. This building is older, and we definitely need to continue to maintain it. We did, as you might not remember, but I'd love to share, we did replace all of the skylights in the main library 2 years ago. So this is just part of our ongoing improvements in taking care of our facilities that we would in any of our locations. I hope that helps. Unfortunately, can't help the price of it, but they are custom windows, so we are needing to take care of it so that we can make sure that we're cost saving in other areas when we have our heat and our AC on. Thank you.
and thank you, Heidi. I appreciate you being here to answer that. Thank you.
Thank you. In the interest of time, please keep track of any other questions. Do we have an online question?
I'm sorry, our city attorney has requested to speak.
Okay.
Thank you. Just real quick, back to the discussion of the ARPA funds not being federally restricted any longer and moved into a certain account. We would still, from a legal perspective, need to ask, are there any other restrictions on those, even though there are no federal restrictions on them? So just be aware of that going forward. It's something to keep in the back of your mind. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And later on, I've made note of this question. And if there are other council members interested in coming back to that, we'll get clarity by the end of this. So in the interest of time, let's move on to the airport presentation. Is that Heidi Hansen? Are you going to be leading that?
No, actually, Brian Gall and Barney Helmet from the airport are going to be handling this part of the segment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Heidi. Good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. I'm Brian Gall, Airport Programs Manager. I also have with me Barney. And today we're going to be talking to you about the airport's capital improvement plan, how it's developed, its funding sources, and the projects that we anticipate in the coming years. So to start off, the airport is an enterprise fund. We have several ongoing and one-time revenue sources. Those ongoing revenue sources include things like our leases, license agreements, and fees. which are generally from our airlines, our rental car companies, hangar rentals for the private hangars we have on the airport, our business leases to businesses within the terminal, operating fees, advertising within the terminal itself, and soon to be added is our upcoming parking fees that are part of our new economy lot that is currently under construction. We also have some one-time revenue sources. Those generally include federal and state grants from the Federal Aviation Administration, which we'll refer to as the FAA in this presentation. Those come in two forms: formula grants that are based on our number of passengers, basically how busy we are here at the airport. Those are kind of at the airport's discretion to spend every year. Also FAA competitive grants. Those are grants that we compete for funding with other airports and other facilities with. And also grants from the Arizona Department of Transportation. Those come from the ADOT Multimodal Planning Division Aeronautics Group. So it is an aviation-specific wing of ADOT that helps us with those grants. So our capital improvement plan is a 5-year program. The process of developing that starts with our airport master plan. I added a picture of the cover of the airport master plan just for reference. It's a pretty lengthy document, several hundred pages. It is available on our website if anybody ever wants to take a look at it. And it's developed every 10 years with our last update occurring in 2018. So the Airport Capital Improvement Plan, which we refer to as the ACIP, is developed annually in partnership with our colleagues over at the FAA and ADOT. Basically, we look at the master plan, we look at a component of that, which is called our airport layout plan, that lists the projects that we expect, and work with them to figure out where the funding is going to come from for those projects and how they're prioritized based on a number of different funding priorities from those agencies. So within that capital improvement plan, there are 3 primary funding sources: federal, state, local, which we'll refer to as FSL, state, local, which we'll refer to as SL, and local, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a later slide. We also develop our plan in conjunction with the Airport Commission, and of course have to have some flexibility in it for emergencies that might occur for unexpected projects that we need to address. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there are 2 of the funding sources that we see a lot of on our capital improvement plan are the federal, state, local, and state, local. So within those, there are different funding percentages that are assigned to the different funding agencies, which are the federal government through the FAA, ADOT, and then us at the city. So on the federal, state, and local funding, within those entitlement and discretionary funds, typically the federal government pays 91.06% of the grant amount or of the funding amount. The state pays 4.47%, and the city pays 4.47%. That does vary a little bit based on the grant. For example, the CARES grants that we've talked a little bit about at previous budget retreats is funded 100% by the federal government through the FAA. And the FAA Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is a newer grant that we're going to talk about a little bit later as well, has varied funding sources based on which program the grant comes out of. Generally speaking, the federal portion of the funding is 80 to 90%. The state funds between 0 and 10%, and the city of Flagstaff would fund the remaining 10 to 20%. Those ranges are a little bit wider, as I mentioned, because there are multiple programs within the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and also because that's a newer grant and we're still working through some of the rules and requirements for it. For the state and local funded projects, the state generally pays 90% and the city of Flagstaff pays the remaining 10%. On the right side of that slide is a screenshot from our airport master plan. And I know that the text is really small, and I'm sure that it's probably impossible to read at most people's screens, but I wanted to include that because it shows some of the documentation that we use in developing our capital improvement plan. Those boxes around the edge show the short-term, intermediate-term, and long-term projects that are planned as part of our master plan that are then developed into our capital improvement plan. Next slide, please. So for projects in our upcoming 5-year CIP, starting with the fiscal year 22 and 23 projects, the biggest one we have listed is our multi-use equipment building, also referred to as a snow removal equipment building. Right now, we're showing that as a $24.8 million federal, state, and locally funded program. The rendering on the right shows an example of one of the options of what that building may look like. And so that amount shown there is the total amount for the building, but it's not necessarily from one funding source. So some of these later grants that are shown here will also go into the funding of that construction. We also show a state and local grant for acquisition of $2 million worth of current federally owned property off the end of one of our runways. That is to protect the runway safety area. It's basically a clear area off the end of our runways to prevent encroachment and keep people on the ground safe from any kind of aircraft emergencies. We also have a project for an ADOT runway rehabilitation. That's a pavement maintenance project for our runway and some of our taxiways that will actually be bringing to council as an intergovernmental agreement and grant in the coming weeks. These 3 FAA AIP grants shown on the slide are for some more recent funding priorities. That first one mentioned is an operations and maintenance grant funded by the FAA. The second 2 are specific to that new bipartisan infrastructure law. That $1.48 and $1.40 million grants are actually going to be used as part of the funding source for that multi-use equipment building. We also show a $500,000 project for parking lot improvements. The funding source for that is anticipated to be the revenue from our upcoming paid parking program. Next slide, please.
Brian, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. So for our FY 24 through 27 projects, the first thing I'd like to say is that this part is a little bit more in flux. As I mentioned, emergencies can come into play and change this funding priorities. Also, you'll notice the third one on there is the rehabilitation of the runway. That ADOT grant we have this year, if it goes through as planned, may reduce the requirement or eliminate the requirement for this project in coming years. But just a quick overview of these. We have a project to rehabilitate and relocate one of our taxiways. That's a safety priority funded by the FAA. They've changed their geometric requirements for taxiways, so that would be a project to move that. An additional grant funded project to acquire some land off the end of our runway. A project to expand and construct and expand our existing terminal. And some additional parking lot and taxiway rehabilitation projects. So as you'll notice, most of these, or actually all of these grants, are either funded through state and local partnerships or through federal state local partnerships. On the right-hand side, you'll see an example of one of the exhibits that we share with the FAA and ADOT for approval every year that shows those funding priorities based on the capital improvement plan. Next slide, please. And I know that was a pretty brief overview of our operations at the airport at this time and our expected projects, but if anybody has any comments or questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
Yes, Mayor Deasy.
Yeah, my question is, so with the bipartisan infrastructure law, we identified, well, the equipment building that we need for, what, $22 million? Is that going to be the 80% or 90% threshold from federal funding, or do we know? So it's a difference between like 2.2 and 4.4 million.
Sure. So it's actually a little bit even muddier than that, because that 24.8 million is funded by a number of different programs, a couple of which are the bipartisan infrastructure law. So a portion of it is coming out of our FAA discretionary fund, which is that 91.06 and then 4.47% match. And then a portion of it is also going to come from FAA entitlement money. That's a pot we're waiting to see how much the FAA is able to give us to make up that funding difference. But that would also be funded with that 4.47% match from the city of Flagstaff. We're going to, I think at this point, we expect roughly 5 or 6 million to come from the infrastructure law. And I don't know offhand what that funding percentage is going to be. I'll have to look at the grant agreement a little bit closer, unless Barney or Stacy happens to know that.
I would refer to Stacy on that.
Good morning. We do not have a grant agreement yet on the bill funds. They have not been, we know what the apportionment is, but it's going to follow the AIP program, so it'll probably be that 90-10 or 9106.
Thank you.
Were there some questions online?
Yes, Councilmember Shimoni.
Councilmember Shimoni.
Thank you very much, Brian, Barney, and Heidi. Good presentation. Just had a question, just looking at our regional plan policy T7.3, support a public transit system design that encourages frequent and convenient access points for various transportation modes and providers such as private bus and shuttle systems, park and rides, lots for cars and bicycles, and well-placed access to bus, railroad, and airport terminal facilities. Heidi, I know in your recent capital or report to council, you said do not ask you to help find the funding, and you made that a point. And I'm going to push back on that, a little bit, and just wonder how can that shuttle be part of the conversation here in regards to the airport. I know that Mountain Line is currently working on figuring out how to make this pilot more resilient and last longer than June, as it's becoming more and more popular. And I'm hoping that we can find a way internally to fund it through Mountain Line. But I just want the city and the airport specifically to be open to this and have this on the radar and have this as one of their values, right? One of our values and goals. And I see city managers raised his hands, but wanted to put that out there and see if that's something we can embrace as a city is the value for a shuttle, and more than just a statement.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni. City Manager?
Yes, and thank you for the question, Council Member. I think the quick answer is yes. We do embrace it. I look back over the past year or two, and the whole discussion of transit to the airport, if you were to look at things over time, how it's progressed, it has really elevated. And very good in-depth discussions, exploratory discussions rather, about transit possibilities. A lot of information being shared, and then fast forward to the present now, courtesy of Mountain Line. Thank you so much to the folks at Mountain Line for this. We have a shuttle system, a pilot project underway. All of these things have transpired recently. So I think your question is very good, and I think the answer is likewise very good. We are starting this, and I don't think any of us could expect it to end. I think we all should expect it to continue to progress in a very positive direction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other Thank you so much. Are there any other online comments?
Heidi Hansen.
Heidi Hansen.
Mayor, Councilmember Shimoni, great question. And Councilmember Shimoni, we are still working with Mountain Line to see if they can get a grant to extend this past June. And we just so you know, we just do not have the funding right now, though, to continue that program. But it doesn't mean that we wouldn't look at trying to do that program later if they aren't successful in finding another grant. We have actually, when Brian was speaking and Barney, and then of course Adam Miali, who's helping us with our second parking lot, they've actually have created bump outs and things like that so that we can have the buses and the shuttles and things like that easily come through the airport and drop people off and exit. We also have bike lockers that are actually going to be installed so that people that, I want to see you actually ride your bike with your luggage to the airport. So let me know that day, because I'm coming out and I'm taking some pictures. But at any rate, when there are people that are coming to the airport and they need somewhere to put their bikes and things like that, there will be safe places to do so. We also have actual additional parking spaces that are going to have even more EV ability in the second lot as well. This is actually a phased program that we're doing. So when I was, and I was teasing, when I was teasing about the shuttle, we are still going to be in communication with them, but even Mountain Line feels this is a great way to see this pilot project be done, because we can see their numbers, we can see how it was utilized and all of that, and then we can regroup and then we can discuss this at greater length. So just so you know, we will come back to all of you and we will let you know how those results looked, and then we will continue to talk to you about our next steps. So thank you for the question.
I appreciate that, everybody. And I just want to make sure we're open to this and working towards this together and not just closing that door. So that's great to hear. Thank you. And I have ridden my bicycle to an airport, not ours, but airports in the past. So it wouldn't be the first. And I will definitely let you know when I do that here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. So just a time check, we are running a few minutes behind. So I just want to remind everybody the wonderful leadership skill of brevity. So please be clear and concise with comments and questions as we present. And I want to bring up the Better Business Bureau. Thank you so much. Let's begin that presentation.
Hi, good morning, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Council. Eliza Kretzman, Beautification Arts and Sciences Manager. It's great to be here with you today. So I'm going to talk about two funds today, the Arts and Science Fund and the Beautification Fund. And so we'll start with Arts and Science. To explain the color of money, this is entirely bed, board, and beverage tax funded. And as a reminder, those are funds that are for these purposes only as defined by ordinance and as confirmed by voters. So Arts and Sciences, how we get our 5-year plan. Our project selection is mainly driven by our Beautification and Public Art Commission priorities, and it consists of projects adopted during the budget process with that commission. We do have input from the public as well with this fund, and we've increased that public input in the last few years through selection panels, community forum surveys, and other focus groups, et cetera, with the public. We coordinate with other divisions such as Parks and Sustainability. And I also want to mention that this fund is actually mainly allocated to non-capital project items. So, for example, much of the funding is given through Creative Flagstaff to grants to the art, culture, and science nonprofit sector here in Flagstaff to about 40 different organizations annually. Next slide, please. So I want to start with a project that is nearing construction. This will be familiar to council. This is the library entry that has been mentioned earlier. This is funded partially through a public art fund, $70,000 for a public art component. This project is driven by the need to bring the entry up to ADA compliance. The design is based on inclusive design and has beautification and public art woven throughout. This is a collaborative project. Quite a bit of community input has been involved in this project. And also we are collaborating with, of course, the library, engineering and capital. Jeremy DeGator is doing a great job of leading this team, and also with Parks as well. Next slide, please. So this slide, I am covering a few items that need to stay in place due to the commission or community commitment. The first is, as you know, we are working with the new Downtown Connection Center to provide public art components. So we have $35,000 for local artist components, and this is nearing the design phase. The Murdoch Center, there is a current grant out for CDBG funding. This is led by Neighborhood Planning. Mark Revis has a proposal out, and so we're providing some public art funds to support the improvements at the Murdoch Center if that fund should indeed come through the grant. Indigenous representation, we've been working with Rose Tohi here at the city and others to explore what this may look like. And we're currently exploring rotating art at the Sawmill Multicultural Art and Nature County Park. And we are beginning the community process actually now. Next slide. So some further out projects that allow for more flexibility are highlighted on this slide. We have alley activation in the historic core, so adding public art to make those more welcoming and inviting spaces. The commission is also interested in East Side neighborhoods and in continuing to increase public art and beautification projects there, things such as the new upcoming roundabout. We also are looking further out at some projects to celebrate the astronomy-related projects and history here in Flagstaff, so Pluto and Lunar Legacy. And finally, the Rio de Flag. We have some funding earmarked, recognizing how impactful that project will be. Next slide. I will now move to our beautification fund. As with arts and science, this is entirely bed, board, and beverage tax funded. So much like with our 5-year plan for arts and science, we really are driven by our commission priorities as well as city leadership. We work closely with other divisions such as parks, engineering and capital improvements, community development. And I just want to note that many of these projects are also infrastructure and not purely aesthetic. And as with arts, we have a lot of input from the public on selection panels, neighborhood and community association meetings, and things such as that. Next slide. So here is a project I am highlighting that is nearing construction. This is familiar to council thanks to Jenna Weldon, who presented this to you not too long ago in quite some depth. This is the airport art fence called Coconino Scroll. The commission was very involved in this, and we also had public input from the selection panels, the Southside Community Association, focus groups, and others. And also, since we're relating a lot of Flagstaff history here, we also worked with an array of experts such as Lowell Observatory. So with the footnotes that the art corresponds to, we checked with many community members, experts, and others to inform the language in those pieces. Next slide. So this slide is our longest. This is highlights of projects that we are committed to. The library entry also has a beautification funding component amongst other funding sources. The Downtown Connection Center, we are looking at a constellation of 5 art projects there, and right now we are focusing on 2, including art glass at the new Mountain Line building, a proposed sculpture that is in the design phase. And I just do want to mention that we anticipate future phases and funding for this project as well. We're also working on the Lone Tree Overpass with the contractors and subcontractors to bring an artist into the design team. So we have some funding to allocate towards the design of those more aesthetic elements. Aspen Avenue Niche, this is a pedestrian bicycle focused area next to Pay and Take with a decorative fence and some amenities such as seating and bicycle parking. The next 2 are Route 66 focused. One is a landscaping project to continue the decades of landscaping our program has done along that important roadway. And then the Route 66 Historic Trail is a multi-year project that started in 2017 with placemaking along that route. Construction is beginning soon on 3 of those elements. And then we'll be continuing our flowers, expanded use of right-of-way, and traffic signal cabinet projects. Next, please. Some further out projects that have more flexibility include roundabout projects, alley activation, the kind of beautification components of that. Bike and pedestrian safety is a new priority that came out of our most recent budget retreat with our commission. So seeing if beautification and public art can have a role in that arena. Youth-related projects are also high priority for our commission, such as school walkways, schoolyards, and creating or improving a playground. And the 4th Street Bridge, Phase 2, these are the new bridges over I-40 and adding a public art component to the pedestrian railways there. Next, please. And finally, this is just to show you the top 10 priorities from our commission, from our budget retreat. You'll see the roundabouts here, pedestrian bike safety and alley activation are very high on their list of priorities, followed by the 4th Street bridges, then some youth-related elements that I mentioned earlier, and finally, green space on the south side, recognizing that as a high priority that came out of the South Side Neighborhood Plan, the recent update, with number 10 being specifically the Murdoch Center landscaping plan. That is my final slide. So unless there are other questions, I'll turn it over to the next presenter.
We'll hold questions on that part till the next presenter, and we'll have an opportunity for questions then. Thank you so much, Eliza.
Thank you.
And for recreation?
Hi, good morning, everyone. Amy Hagan, Parks Manager and Interim Recreation Manager. We just have a couple slides here, so we'll get through these pretty quickly. So Parks, Recreation, Open Space, and Events, otherwise known as PROS, we are both general and BBB tax funded. Apologize for the scratchy voice. A capital improvement plan. So this is brand new to PROS, which is amazing. So some heartfelt thank yous. So how will we build our 5-year plan? Because we're finally faced with building one, which is an incredible spot to be in. So we'll do some project selection, which will be driven by, because we do have 2 commissions with our Parks and Recreation Commission and our Open Space Commission. We're also will have a new master plan in the year 2023. That'll also be a guiding document to help drive this 5-year plan. And then I think lastly, most important is probably seek matching grants to boost our ongoing capacity of $600,000 per fiscal year. Plus we do have a one-time capacity of $1 million in this upcoming fiscal year. Next slide. Okay, a couple just projects to highlight. One of them will be $700,000 we've identified for new sport courts. And honestly, the intention there is to design and construct 4 to 6, or if we can get more, great, courts at Bushmaster Park. Also, it would be another item to mention is we are going to be delivering permanent restrooms to Thorpe Park, one of our largest regional parks in the downtown area. What a lovely amenity to add to that area. It will be near the playground and the Ramada space over there for those that are familiar with it. I do think that it'll probably cost a little bit more than $200,000 to actually deliver them. We're working through some of those idiosyncrasies now so that we can ensure that we're providing the most cost-effective asset to the community. Next slide. Actually, I think that would be it. So questions. Told you I'd go fast.
Yes, thank you, Rebecca and Eliza, for your clarity and briefness. Yes, online.
We do. Councilmember Shimoni.
Shimoni. Councilmember Shimoni.
Of course. Yes, I'm here. First of all, I just want to say again, I appreciate these retreats to give us time to talk about these things as a council with the staff and the leadership. So I appreciate the time spent on our conversations. In the sake of brevity, I'll get right to the point. Eliza, my questions for you. I really appreciate what you presented, and I was wondering, through the lens of equity, and I think you know where I'm going with my thought here, but I'm just thinking about the east side. And the sunny side, and just 4th Street in general, other than the bridge, but I'm wondering if we can ask the commission to further look into how to better prioritize Sunnyside and 4th Street, that corridor through BPAC and the beautification. And I'm just thinking, a lot of the projects you listed are downtown or on the west side. And I'm just wondering how we can further balance those priorities.
Thank you, council member. This has come up with our commission quite a bit as well. So you are thinking along the same lines as they are. And so that is a conversation we're having. Good. We also anticipate projects like the 4th Street Lockett Roundabout and some additional projects around that roundabout that will be very community focused as well. So it's something that we are definitely talking about and moving towards. And I will relay this, your message onto them as well.
Very good. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you so much. Were there any other online comments in the room?
Not that I see. May I just make a quick comment?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, just to keep top of mind, and thank you, Eliza, for the answer. But the South Side neighborhood still needs a neighborhood plan. And I think our planning department has that as a priority in the next 2 to 3 years. So perhaps capital improvement and other equity and beautification component can be incorporated in the South Side neighborhood plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. And it looks like we'll be moving on to solid waste with Todd Hansen and Scott Overton.
Good morning, Todd Hansen, Solid Waste and Fleet Services Director. First slide, so the color of money, we are an enterprise fund developed from the solid waste fees, and those are the landfill fees and the fees that we collect for residential and commercial solid waste collection. The general fund does not contribute to the solid waste fund. That next project, the landfill road, also known as Forest Road 6010. So that has been project for several years now. That road is at the end of its life. It was developed in 1965 when the landfill opened, and it's actually beyond its life. Of that $3 million, the county has agreed to contribute $1.68 million to that project. So that's an agreement that we have with the county. The electrical upgrade along Landfill Road, that is for 3-phase power to come in, because we're going to need that for gas collection for the blowers and the leachate collection and the possibility of an on-site well. Next slide. So landfill sequence D, so that's the next phase of the landfill development. The current cells that we're working on right now are going to close in about 5 to 7 years. So we started phase 1 already this year, and phase 2 we should start this summer to complete cell D, and that's going to take several years to complete. None of the projects at the landfill get done in one fiscal year. They're all multi-year projects. We can go to the next slide. That's just an overview of the map of the landfill. Cell D is in that yellow section down in the bottom left, and that's a 33-acre site. Next slide. Again, showing that 33 acres for cell D that we're going to develop. Next slide. So there's $200,000 in there for the materials recovery facility transition. And that's just a guesstimate of some of the costs that we're going to need to convert that from a MRF to a transfer station. And it could be a push wall, it could be reconfiguring the loading docks, et cetera. The on-site well is a project that we've been working on since, I think we first mentioned in 2018 that the landfill needs a source of water for several different reasons. One is dust control, and the other one is that if there's ever the possibility of having a compost facility at the landfill, we need water out there. Without water, that will never happen. So what we've done, we did a feasibility study in 2019, and the on-site well was the most cost-efficient way to get water to the landfill, because currently there's no water at the landfill. We haul everything in, potable and non-potable, which caused a problem the other day when we had a contamination to our freshwater potable tank. So we had no water out there for a while. Next slide. Sequence B cap. So that's the current section of the landfill that we're working on right now. And like I said, that's going to close in the next 5 to 7 years. So we need to start planning on how to cap that. And there's several different styles to do it. The most cost efficient way is an ET cap, which is the evaporated transportation cap. And that allows evaporation through the cap, but doesn't allow it to permeate too much. So that's a big project, and there's actually upkeep of that. We're also looking at on that cap to install a solar array. So that'd be some additional cost, but I think we'd regain some of our costs off of that if we did a solar array on the landfill cap. It's kind of a new thing that's been going on the last few years across the nation. I say across the nation, which is, I guess, limiting. The reality is across the nation, there's probably only 2,000 landfills. We've got one of them. So we need to protect it. Methane collection. So when we build a new landfill cell, that's going to be lined. So it's probably going to produce more gas than an unlined current cell. So that one's going to have gas and leachate collection in it. And that's an ongoing cost in addition to the gas collection that we have in the cap sequence B cap. Next slide. Any questions about any of those?
Thank you so much, Todd Hansen. Do we have any online comments or questions? No.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Streets and Transportation. Sam Beckett and Scott Overton, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mayor and Council. Scott Overton, serving as the Public Works Director, and
Sam Beckett, Street Section Director.
A couple things I just wanted to provide a comment, because I do think this is a hybrid location in the budget and the process that sometimes gets a little bit mixed or can be a component of capital. But I think it's really important to stress that Public Works, streets operations in particular, and our transportation side of the house is a very different program than a capital program with a capital C. And I want to provide some introductory comments that Sam will get into the details of a very small piece of capital that we do house in Public Works in this side of the program, but it's very, very different than what you're going to hear after your break, which will be much more transportation, capital, truly intensive delivery type projects. And the differences are unique. And I think this is an appropriate place for you to understand that when a capital project is built and delivered for our community, Public Works has the responsibility to take it on and to maintain it and move it into the future. Where we see some hybrid cross-pollination of the budgeting, which is a really fancy sentence that I've just created, you find that you sometimes might have a confusion or a request of one type of funding, and they can be one and the same. So oftentimes HERF could be used to deliver a bridge, but we really don't do that in the city of Flagstaff. We utilize different types of funding streams and colors of money to deliver that, whereas the highway user revenue funds are more focused on a maintenance element in Flagstaff. So it's a really important nuance, and it can go both ways. So you might also see some projects later today that involve a bond program or an ask of the voters. At times, those dollars can go the other way and be utilized for maintenance. So we're starting to see some of that activity, for example, on the separated bike lane project. Capital delivered, her funds are maintaining, but in the future, that might look a little bit different. So I think it's really important that we provide you some perspective from the Public Works maintenance side of the house on how two funds are really integral to the way we function. And then hopefully that'll connect some dots for you later this afternoon with the transportation piece you're going to hear from with the actual capital side of the house. Pretty good intro?
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
All right, it's all yours, Sam.
I'm all done. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, but to kick it off, I thought it was important that we do look at what is actually listed from the Attorney General. So when you do look at HERF, what is it truly for? It's streets, construction of streets, everything street related. Now, when we get outside of that, it gets into a sticky situation. Most of us who have lived in the HERF world for the last 10, 15, 20 years have seen that transition, and the auditors come in, and it's restricted us down even further than what we could do. So much like Scott said, when we get outside of street work and street maintenance, we have to find other funding. It's just not a viable option at a federal level. And so I just wanted to make sure that this was in here. People had it as a reference. For the local government in particular, this is the restrictions it comes down to, right? The developments of roads, bridges, streets, that kind of stuff, proper reconstruction and maintenance, things like that. Everything related to roads themselves. So just a key piece I wanted everybody to see as we get into the discussion. Next slide. Here, a couple of the projects that we have, really maintenance related, right? So we have the sidewalk project program. So that program there is now up to $200,000 annually. And what we're trying to do is get out there and replace a lot of these sidewalks that have lifted in our environment, which many of you have seen with our freestyle cycles. That concrete shifts around a lot, and trying to keep up with that is a whole program in itself. And that's what we're building out. Currently, we're working on building out a staff to support that. What we're finding is the efficiency of internal versus external. Our money's going a lot further internal. It just is. With the price of everything right now, it just makes more sense to find a way to staff it and house it internally. So that's one of the pieces we've been working on each year to maximize that funding. Our chip seal program, that program is right now for this year, you'll see is $2.1 million. However, it's flexible because her funds are based on how much and how often people travel. So that dollar could go down to 1.2 next year and up to 4.4 the year after. So we have to be flexible in our planning, understand what our priorities are, and try and tackle the biggest projects and get as much done as possible each year with the funding we have, because there's no guarantee we have that same funding next year. As we get down into the next phase of this, the R&R and SNS is the road repair and street safety program. These pieces here are funded through sales tax, primary supplement, and efforts catch up on HERF shortfalls. So this piece here helps us get to those pieces that maybe aren't tied directly to streets. So sidewalk program, it's not really tied to streets. HERF would not allow for that to be funded, right? So we have to find an alternative. And then we have to build time to that. Just because we were able to find money to do the program, now we have to be able to build people's time to that program and not HERF. So it's just a balance, and we have to work through that. The asphalt overlay program, again, flexible. As we're seeing those HERF funds, one year we could have $2 million, next year we could have $8 million. So we try and build out a program that's flexible enough that we can expand and contract as needed each year to maximize those funds and ensure that we get those projects done. Now, most of that comes up, and we'll start seeing a lot of that break ground right here towards the end of the fiscal year into the next fiscal year. And you'll see those projects kick off as we try and plan and understand what we truly will be working with in the following year. All right, next slide. That's it. I'm sure I left a lot to be desired, so if you have any questions, I'm open.
We have some online comments.
Councilmember Shimoni.
Councilmember Shimoni.
Yes, it's me. Hey, Sam and Scott, thank you for the presentation. I'm wondering if you can speak to how we can shift our priorities more towards bike and ped maintenance and upkeep from just vehicle maintenance and upkeep.
Are you talking about funding wise or just overall?
Funding.
Yeah, so that's tough. That kind of goes back to what we were discussing. I think you and I even had this conversation once was, why does Parks and Rec take care of sidewalks? Well, HERF doesn't allow us to, right? So currently,
Foots trail.
and foots trails as well, same thing like that. It's not the same. Now, if that gets changed at a federal level, obviously these conversations can change, but I know there's a lot of push in a lot of different directions. I don't have any control over that. What I have control over now is what I can and can't do with the current funds. Outside of that, those projects can get done. We just have to find another way to fund them. And then ultimately, I can't have HERF-funded staff supporting it. So then we have to find who's going to support that long-term maintenance. And unfortunately, I think a lot of that defaults back to Parks and Rec. But no, I think it's a great question, but I think it's one that many organizations across the country right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, Councilmember McCarthy.
I'm a little confused about sidewalks. I thought people were responsible to maintain the sidewalk in front of their property.
Yeah. So you actually are very familiar with the recent ordinance of 2020-01, which was the sidewalks maintenance ordinance. You are, as a adjoining property owner, responsible for the pedestrian sidewalk infrastructure in front of your property. So you sweep it, you keep the weeds knocked down, you keep the branches out from under it. When the sidewalk is physically damaged, there's a responsibility on the property owner, as directed by ordinance, for them to repair that. Council directives of the past have been for us to assist residents with that. So if you have a buckled sidewalk in front of your home, it's identified, it's repaired or replaced either by a private contractor or by city crews or a city contracted crew. We have a program in place, and this is where the $200,000 goes to assist our residents with a 50% cost share. So the work is done. We split the costs with the property owner, makes for a good passable sidewalk. The nuance and the exception to that is business owners are 100% responsible for their adjoining sidewalk. So a little bit of difference. And then that 50% match is only as council allows and can be funded. So in the future, if things got tight or if we had budget constraints or we had to reprioritize, that might be one of the programs we'd have to look at if we could continue that 50% match.
Well, Scott, it sounds like you're on top of it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Don't I get a great
No.
We have a question online, which we'll get to, and we'll begin with Mayor Deasy.
Yeah, I was interested in you saying about doing things internally as opposed to externally. Now with all these rising costs and the changing landscape, this may be more of a general question than just streets, but are we evaluating that so comprehensively throughout our organization for all of these capital improvement projects on what might be more cost effective to do internally?
So I'll speak to Public Works or these streets anyway. That's a constant evaluation. We're always looking at ways to maximize funding, yet be able to support it and truly deliver the project at the quality and service that it needs. A lot of those we can do. We're fortunate to have project management within the Public Works Department, and we're expanding that a little bit, more of a jack of all trades, if you will. We don't want to take away from the big more well-known projects that Rick's team takes care of. However, we're a great supplement to take care of a lot of these other projects, a lot of the maintenance side of it, and to keep things moving to allow them to complete some of these bigger construction pieces. But I think it's a constant evaluation on our part. Sometimes it's just not viable, but we're working through it.
And the only piece I would add, Mayor, thank you for the question, is we certainly have internal programs and we can find good value, and we are able to take employees in Public Works in particular, cross-train, utilize for different programs throughout the year. So maybe it's snow operations or, a concrete program or striping and signing program. And we've really, I think, broadened our horizons in Public Works. I think the difficulty all of our divisions in the city are facing, and Public Works is not exempt, is just lack of qualified candidates. We're now running at a 40% vacancy rate. So when we can't find qualified concrete professionals, moving into that trade, even though it's a small program, we're kind of resorting towards contracting those services out and hiring contractors because we simply don't have the talent in-house. And I think it really does signal a change in the trades and a change in our applicant pools. And we're going to have to continue to address that for many years to come. And it's been a long, ongoing challenge, but it's getting more and more difficult to have in-house skilled trades. And I don't know if that problem's going to go away, even though we're working on it as hard as we can.
Thank you. And just to follow up, that makes me think about our presentation about workforce development the other day and how much we engage in that individual, the whole project, yes, regionally, but really for our organization, how can we engage these new workforce development opportunities that are coming in? So
yeah, you'll certainly see us out and about. We're trying all new avenues and we're trying to get the word out. I mean, we have a lot of good career opportunities citywide, but in public works, they're some of the best. And we're telling our story and we're really working a lot of those recruitment angles. And I hope that we can be successful with future quality employees and not only retain the great ones we have, but really bring in some talent and some individuals that might be employees here for a long time. And skilled trades have just been very, very difficult for the last 5 or 6 years.
Thank you for that question, Mayor Daisy. We have a question online.
Yeah, Councilmember Shimoni had a follow-up question.
Councilmember Shimoni?
Yeah, thank you. I forgot to ask Sam and Scott, when we do sidewalk repair, I've brought this to our attention, I think a few times now, the sidewalk portion on East Humphreys, I think near Birch, is a real mess. And for anyone that has mobility struggles, I think would be near impossible to navigate. Is that something that's risen to the priority list, to the top?
Councilmember, thanks for the inquiry. Again, we've discussed this a number of times. That is an ADOT right of way.
Oh, that's right.
So just leave it at that and we'll follow back up with you, but
okay,
certainly aware of it.
Very good. Thank you.
Yep.
Were there other questions either online or in the room? Okay, I bet everyone is as ready for a break as I am. So let's take that break and we will be back at 10 o'clock. Actually, can we please come back at 9:55 and give us some wiggle room moving forward, please? 9:55. Thank you.
Oh, back on in.
Thank you so much. Okay. We are ready to move on after our break, and thank you so much for all of the efforts to create space for discussion and questions while being clear and concise in our presentations. And we are beginning again with transportation, streets, and general partnership opportunities. Trevor, take us away.
Yes, good morning. Mayor, council members, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Trevor Henry with the Capital Improvements section.
And I'm Rick Barrett, City Engineering Director. Good morning.
So we thank you for this opportunity to present this information. I'm going to go over a few items, starting off the transportation and streets portion of the program. And then later we'll kind of get into the bulk of the discussion, which is the bike and pedestrian and safety items. So under the streets and transportation category, we have the transportation tax fund. This transportation tax fund comprises of the old and new tax, is kind of how we refer to it, and I'll explain why. So the old tax was Proposition 403, which was originally voted on and passed by the citizens of Flagstaff in 2000. The old tax would run for a period of 20 years. So in 2020, the old tax expired. The old tax was included in previous CIP FY fiscal year summaries. The old tax converted or covered projects that were identified as safety and street improvements and delivered as such. The new tax is under Proposition 419, and this was voted on and passed by the citizens of Flagstaff in 2018, and that is current. The new tax was essentially a renewal or a continuation of the old tax, and the new tax would run for a period of 21 years beginning in 2020. So the new tax has been showing up in the current FY CIP summaries. The new tax would cover improvements for roadways, pedestrians, bicycles, and safety. There were other purposes of the new tax that were to be covered, such as technology and signing, acquisition of necessary real estate, and relocation costs. So those are just some other purposes that were covered in the new tax. The new tax has been identified for 5 project types. So we have new street projects, street widening projects, and street operations, bicycle and pedestrian projects, and the last is general improvements and partnerships. Next slide. So as part of the retreat, our understanding and what we wanted to present and just have a discussion about is projects that need to stay in place, as well as projects maybe in the out years that have flexibility to have a discussion. So the first project we wanted to talk about was Beulah and University. This has been in the council's discussion and has been considered. If you look on the CIP summary, it is shown in row 10 and 15 on page number 8. So the project comprises of the old tax and new tax. The project will extend Beulah Boulevard to University Avenue. So there's a lot of coordination going on with private developments in this area. The project will be delivered as a CMAR, which is a construction management at risk. And soon you will be seeing a GMP come before the council for consideration. Construction is anticipated for 2 seasons. Therefore, we will have 2 phases. Phase 1 will be the work there at Beulah and University, which will be the roundabout. And the second phase will be there on Milton. And in the CIP summary, we have a total plan amount of $16,741,866. So a couple of the items that we feel is necessary to explain is that we've been to several commissions, transportation, pedestrian, bike advisory. But there's a lot of partnerships going on there with private developments, more like Vintage. Some of those partners there, we have agreements with ADOT because Milton is a state highway, a state route. We've been talking with NAU. We've been talking with a lot of the private businesses there in that vicinity. Another project we wanted to highlight that we feel is necessary to stay is the Lone Tree Railroad Overpass. And this is a project that has again been in the forefront and that we've been talking with you about. The project will provide a grade separated crossing of the railroad tracks. It will connect Butler to Route 66. It is part of Proposition 420 that was voted on and approved by the citizens of Flagstaff in 2018. We have been listening. The discussion, this project has been before council, and we have been listening, and there's been a lot of great ideas and suggestions about bike and ped safety, as well as intersection scenarios and situations that we have been working on and we're still working on. We're going to bring that before you again. The funding shown in the summary is FY23 and out years, and the summary shows a total plan amount of $70,186,681. And again, that is on CIP page 8, row 27. And again, just several commissions that we've been to. We've done a lot of public outreach and engagement. I know council has been there. We've had some field walks and field visits that have turned out really great, and we're just moving forward. But this is one project that we feel needs to remain as shown. Another project is what we call JWP, which is John Wesley Powell. So this portion is called Phase 1 and 2, and this will continue JWP near Pine Canyon subdivision and continue all the way up to 4th Street. So right now, this project is in what we refer to as a study phase. So we are working to come up with a preferred alignment for this corridor. And we have been talking with landowners, big and small within this area, and we're coming up with a lot of good discussion points and topics for the study. And once we get this corridor in place, then it'll be turned over to the planning section to become a specific plan. So we're kind of moving through that process. And in the CIP, the total plan amount is just under 300,000. And that is to finish what we've started as far as the study. And then when it gets to the planning section, it'll become a specific plan. So there is some funds there. And again, this portion is mapped out in the regional plan, and it does have a necessary item or need for it within the section. So with this project, in our opinion, does need to stay in place. Another project that we wanted to highlight is the Butler Avenue widening. And just a couple days ago, this project was before you. We had a great discussion. We talked about how we are going to move this project forward. Again, we've been listening. We heard all the great suggestions and comments and discussion points about bikes and peds and safety, as well as intersection. And so this project will be working towards that. Later next week, the RSOQ, which is the request for statements of qualifications for design consultants, will be released, and we will be starting that process. We've committed to a robust public outreach and engagement process. So we just wanted to highlight that for council. We do plan to deliver this project as a CMAR. Again, that's a construction manager at risk process. In the summary, it is shown as a total plan amount of just over $16 million, and that is for current year and out years. One of the items we did want to highlight is just working again with a lot of the developments within this corridor. There's subdivisions going in Canyon del Rio. We have been talking with Little America. There's also some housing and senior assisted housing that will be going in, facilities there. So there's a lot of discussion points that have been going on. So for Butler Avenue widening. Another project we have is the Lockett and 4th Roundabout. This is in the northeast section of Sunnyside. What we'll be doing there is providing a roundabout to better provide circulation that has been discussed. And next week, we will be bringing before council for a amendment to the IGA. So this project is a coordination effort with ADOT. It involves HIS, Highway Safety Improvement Program funding. So that is through ADOT. So we will be bringing that to you next week as an amendment. We will have a good discussion. We'll have more of a presentation, which will give an idea of what the project is. We're currently in the design process. So the amendment will speak of the design and how we're working on that and why we need to come to you with that amendment. So that will be there. Right now in the CIP, the total plan amount is $3.3 million. And again, we do feel this project needs to stay in place and needs to continue on as shown in our CIP summary. Dark sky lighting. So this just came at the beginning of March as a procurement contract. March 1st, we provided 5 contracts or 5 vendors that would be able to provide the lighting that we have been working on and working through. So this project, the project's primary objective was to find a solution to Flagstaff street lighting replacement needs while balancing dark skies, safety and maintenance and costs. The city has been in discussions with the local observatories, so USNOFS and Lowell, to name a few, as well as the Dark Skies Coalition. So this has been one that has been on the radar for the city and has been in past summaries for fiscal years. And we are just beginning to move this forward. This is a great project. And so we do feel this is very important to stay in place. In the CIP summary, the total amount shows at $8 million, and this is for the current year and out years, and it is projected to show that way. So moving on, what we believe are projects that have a little more flexibility. So maybe there's some more ideas for discussion, there's more talking points, there's ideas, maybe solutions that we can do for these projects that are in the out years that we can possibly talk about. The first one is John Wesley Powell. This is Lake Mary to the airport. So where John Wesley Powell currently dead ends or keys with Lake Mary, from that point going to the airport would be the next part of that section of roadway. The funding would come from the new tax roadway, bike, pedestrian, and safety. Right now, we are estimating that project to be $14 million. And in the CIP summary, it shows a total plan amount of $14.5 million. So there is some planning efforts, and then the bulk of construction would start. And those are shown in FY 25 to 27. So those are the out years. So this project has a little more flexibility. I did remember hearing at a past council meeting that there was talk about maybe getting into a discussion about this project a little more. So this one would have a little more flexibility. We also have Lone Tree, Pine Knoll to JWP. So this project would upgrade the existing road or Lone Tree on the easterly edge of NAU and then all the way down to John Wesley Powell. I do want to mention that there has been a corridor study for Lone Tree that has been put in place. I believe that was 2010 when that study was completed. And so this project would have elements or components of that study. And it may require or may get into a realignment of Lone Tree to how to better fit a connection down to John Wesley Powell. And it might even include a traffic interchange. So there's a lot of little items there that still need to be fleshed out. And again, this is a project that has a lot of flexibility in our eyes. We do have some funding in the new tax for street widening. As shown, stakeholders that we have been and will talk with are ADOT and NAU, just to name a few. But in our current CIP summary, the total plan amount is $10 million. The last project I'd just like to have a discussion about is West Route 66. So this is a project that would be in coordination with ADOT. So this project would enhance or improve Route 66 from Woodlands Boulevard, Village Boulevard. There you go. I had a problem. From that point going towards the west. So maybe around Woody Mountain is where that section of this project would end. It is a project that we have shown in our summary at $2.7 million. And again, that is a coordination effort with ADOT. Right now, ADOT is within a study or a corridor master plan that they're still working through. And until that is completed, this project cannot move forward successfully until we get more input from ADOT through that study that they're doing, this master plan. In the summary, it is shown at $2.7 million for the current years, and the funding would come from the new tax under roadway, bike, pedestrian, and safety. So again, this project has some flexibility that we could talk about. There's some discussion points there. And those were the projects that we just wanted to highlight and have a discussion based on what is shown in the summary for transportation tax funded projects. So I guess we could go ahead and start with the bike and ped presentation before we start taking questions. Would that be okay?
Yeah, give them a chance to reflect, write down questions, and we'll come back to them. Yeah.
So Martin, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Take it away.
Thank you, Trevor. Good morning, Your Honor, members of the council. My name is Martin Entz. I'm the multimodal transportation planner for the city of Flagstaff. And our list of pedestrian and bike projects in the capital plan is primarily funded through an anticipated $29 million through the transportation sales tax, also known as Prop 419, over the next 20 years. More immediately, for the first 5 years, that amount is somewhat front-loaded. So we have $2 million per year, or $10 million total in anticipated sales tax revenue. We also have $5.5 million in first mile, last mile grant funding. You may be familiar, this is a federal grant that was awarded to Mountain Line for pedestrian and bicycle projects that support transit. So we're working with them on both administration and a list of those projects. Next slide, please. So here, all of our projects for ped and bike went through a very similar 4-step planning process. And here, when we refer to ped and bike projects, there are 5 general categories. They are sidewalks, foot trails, bikeways, enhanced street crossings, and grade separated crossings. And the first step in that process was developing an inventory, which is simply determining what we have already and what we need for those facilities. Second step is determining the implementation, or how they will be built. So in some cases, ped and bike facilities are built as part of private development. In other cases, they're part of other capital projects, like a lot of the street projects that Trevor just listed for you. The ones that are left are the ones that aren't part of another project, and they're the ones that we have to find a way to fund and design and build separately as standalone projects. So they're the ones that we're really most concerned with. The third step involves setting priorities, and here we used a very similar process that includes 3 different factors for determining which of these projects are most important and will provide the most benefit. So the first factor is pedestrian and bicycle generators and attractors. So these are the things that promote walking and biking trips and include schools, transit stops, commercial areas, neighborhoods and high density areas, and those sorts of land uses. The second factor are social issues or social factors. And these are the items that speak to equity and to communities and populations and neighborhoods that would really benefit from enhanced mobility. And some of the social factors that we used in this part of the process include low-income populations, elderly, disability status, non-white populations, locations where there are assisted or affordable housing, households without access to vehicles, and other factors like that. The third factor we call need and functionality. This one is somewhat subjective, but it really is kind of a summation of what we know and what we've heard from the community about how useful a particular project or facility will be. So it gives us a little bit of flexibility, but it kind of allows us to apply our own expertise and what we know about those projects into the prioritization process. So the last step of the 4 steps is planning and programming, and this is simply developing cost estimates and fitting in our priority projects into the next 20 years of funding, and more specifically into the next 5 years of funding based on what we know to be our available funding sources. So here's where we have to make the difficult decisions about what projects stay within that 20 years or what projects are will be built within that first 5 years. And then, of course, which projects kind of fall off the table and are not going to be built with that in the short term or in the medium term. The column on the right of your slide, this process did involve significant community engagement. Over the years, we've done I think 11 different community surveys, and some of them ask directly questions about what do you think are the highest priority projects for improving walking and biking in Flagstaff. Other ones were a little bit less direct. We've also talked to people over the years at a variety of open houses and meetings, tabling events, at other kinds of activities. So over the years, we've talked to in excess of hundreds of people about where they see issues with walking and biking, what are their priorities, what they think the city should do first, et cetera, et cetera. And then finally, we've had over the last couple of years, essentially an ongoing discussion at the pedestrian committee and the bicycle committee about this process and about the project. So it's received a lot of attention and discussion over the last few years. And at the bottom of that slide, there's a link. If you click it, we'll bring up a map that will show all the projects we have across all those different categories, kind of arranged in different ways. And one of the advantages of that map is you can look at different kinds of projects in relationship to each other. So you can see, for example, how the foot system works with a bikeways plan, or how we have grade separated crossings planned at different locations along future foot trails. So you can see how everything kind of works together. Next slide, please. So the next handful of slides talk about some of the individual projects across those 5 categories. So I'll move quickly through these, and I won't dwell too much on individual projects, but when we get to question and answer, if you have questions about particular projects, please bring them up. So for sidewalks, our inventory really only included missing sidewalks along major streets. It would have been a little bit overwhelming to our resources to include neighborhood or local streets that didn't have sidewalks. However, we did include as kind of a category collector streets that lead into neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks. So some examples of that might be include Beaver Street, Steve's Boulevard over on the east side, and Wallapai in the Bone Arrow neighborhood. So these are neighborhoods that don't have sidewalks, but at least if people can walk on local streets and get to the collector that leads them out of the neighborhood, and that collector has sidewalks, that seems to be provide a benefit for walkability. Of the projects there, sidewalk infill are short segments that are relatively easy to construct. We include them as part of the city's road repair and street safety projects. Last year, we constructed a handful of short segments. We have another handful planned for this year, and I think the funding continues for a year or two beyond that to let us complete some of those short sections. Other important projects on the list include Fort Valley Road from Navajo to Meade. That is the first of our first mile, last mile projects, so that is really kind of directly in support of transit. That will include a handful of crossings at different locations that generally align with places where there are transit stops, as well as that intersection at Fort Valley and Forest Avenue, which has been identified as being a little bit challenging for getting across. And next slide. So here this shows a map of the sidewalks that we have programmed within the first 5 years. Again, this includes some funding from Prop 419, the transportation sales tax. It also includes a significant component of funding from the first mile, last mile grant. And we can go on, we won't dwell on this, we can go on to the next slide. Enhanced crossings are at-grade street crossings. They generally include features that assist with crossing, so things that shorten crossing distances, make the crossing more visible, break crossings into components, and generally make it safer and more comfortable to get across the street. It also includes categories of beacon crossings, which are the crossings where the pedestrian presses a button and an amber or red light flashes to help them get across. We've planned those beacon crossings for locations where the street has more lanes, has more traffic, and is faster, and where it would be difficult to get across without the aid of those beacon crossings. So for next year, we have Butler Avenue and O'Leary planned. I'll point out one mistake in this slide. The Fort Valley Road at Forest Anderson and Meade are part of the crossings that I described just a bit ago with the Fort Valley sidewalk. So those should be in next year as well. And you can go to the next slide. And we can talk about grade separated crossings. These are bridges and tunnels that are dedicated for pedestrian and bicycle uses. We also include street overpasses and underpasses that have or don't have facilities to accommodate peds and bikes. So like Butler Avenue, for example, under I-40 has sidewalks, but no bike lanes. So that's another opportunity for peds and bikes. For both the grade separated crossings and the street enhanced crossings, we look at a couple of features to determine where good locations would be. That includes places, long stretches along busy roads where there are a few formal crossing points where additional crossings would be helpful. Where we have generators and attractors of pedestrian uses on both sides of the streets. So along Milton is a good example of that. That also includes where we have a transit stop on one side of the street and a transit stop on the other. We know that people will want to cross at that location. And then finally, we pick locations where we know where there's a need for crossings based on our observation, anecdotal information, what we've heard from the community, crash statistics and crash data, and other factors that kind of get rolled up into indicating that we have a need for crossing at different locations. So you can go to the next slide and see, this is a map. The red circles represent street crossings, and the red square represents the one separated crossing that we have planned in the next 5 years, which is at Florence and Walnut. So next slide, please. Next category is foots trails. Here, the Foots Master Plan is included in the regional plan as map 26. Trails that we have planned that are significant in the next 5 years include the Schweitzer Canyon Trail and the Fox Glen Trail. Some of the other projects on this list are also very important connections, but they tend to be shorter in distance and less significant as construction projects. You can also see that at the bottom of the next year's list, we have a couple of projects that are outside of trails. That includes continuation of our foot signing program, a variety of improvements and enhancements to existing trails to make them function better. And then finally, a little bit of money in the budget for single track or forest access trails that are built to a less formal standard than a foot trail. So they're really built as single track trails, but they provide connectivity between our foot system and the surrounding system of single track. And there's a number of places where we've identified where this would be beneficial. It could be built relatively inexpensively and more quickly than a formal foot trail, but would provide a very nice connection between the city's trail system and some of the regional recreational single track trails. So we can go to the next slide and see, this is a map of the planned trails over the next 5 years. And the two longer red squiggles are those two projects I mentioned, the Schweitzer Canyon Foots and the Fox Glen Trail across the Lamerica's property. So we can move on to the next slide and talk about bikeways. Bikeways are much more complicated than some of the other categories. A sidewalk is a sidewalk, and we can all kind of wrap our heads around that. A foot trail is a foot trail. Bikeways come in a lot of different varieties and configurations. So instead of talking about individual projects here, I'll just kind of give you a general notion of what our philosophy was and how we came to prioritize and decide on the projects that are in the 5-year capital plan. So all the projects are based on an overall bikeways plan. That plan is based on a hierarchy. So we have secondary and primary bikeways that kind of make up the basic system or the backbone system, and then third and fourth level bikeways that provide more comprehensive coverage all over town and within individual neighborhoods. Bikeways are comprised of a variety of facilities. So in the old days, we had bike lanes and foot trails were kind of our two go-to facilities to accommodate bicyclists. Now we have a lot more options. There's a lot of innovative facilities, and we can kind of pick and choose what works best in different locations and then pull it all together as kind of one overall system. So part of our idea is to start introducing some of those other facilities And this includes some protected or separated facilities that give more cyclists more of a feeling of comfort. We include intersections and crossings, so that's a crucial part of an overall network, is being able to get across streets or through intersections. And we've also planned for a notion of transition. So in the near term, we may have interim facilities, but a longer term plan for something that is more robust and more permanent. But at least in the interim, we can build something to have something in place until we can get to that future point. The whole thing is intended to be low stress and comfortable, so it appeals to a larger segment of the population and cyclists of all ages and abilities. I'll give you an idea of our intent for the next 5 years in our priority projects, and it is to fill in gaps, to complete as much as possible of the primary and secondary network. We want to build a few high visibility and impactful projects that include some innovative new facilities as well as protected and separated facilities. We'd like to include improvements to the 3rd and 4th level bikeways to kind of make the whole system a little bit more robust and comprehensive across town. And then finally, our intent is to pull the whole system together through signing, wayfinding, pavement markings, mapping, and information, so it becomes cohesive, comprehensive, more visible than all the standalone pieces, and easier to navigate for users. And then if I can ask you to go 2 slides forward, I'll talk about one particular aspect of our bikeway projects is included in the capital plan under the term bikeway corridor enhancements. And I wanted to describe a little bit about what that meant. Essentially, it's a variety of treatments along the length of the corridor, consistently along the length. So no gaps in between, but kind of something along the way. It generally includes more paint and markings and construction. So things like green bike lanes, 2-stage left turn boxes, buffered bike lanes, cross bike markings, along the whole length of the corridor to kind of pull it together. We focused on primary and secondary networks to kind of make those, again, as part of the backbone system to kind of enhance them. This treatment, we think, will raise the visibility of those corridors as bikeways and make cyclists along them feel more accommodated and more comfortable for more consistently. And if you go back 1 slide, you can see some of the corridors that we've prioritized for that sort of a treatment over the next couple of years. Includes Butler Avenue West, which is the section between Sawmill and Little America. So it's really Butler Avenue Middle, I guess. Forest and Cedar goes all the way from Fort Valley Road to 4th Street from west to east. 4th Street North is Route 66 up to Lockett. A few of the other ones include San Francisco Street and Beaver through the central area. Lynch Cummings is kind of a collection of streets on the east side that will help cyclists get through the mall area on the north side of Highway 89. And of course, in Country Club as a way to get through that neighborhood. And we can probably also add University Avenue to this list from the new roundabout at Buellin University all the way out to the Presidio neighborhood. It's a little bit different sorts of treatment, but really the same concept of treating an entire corridor, making it consistent and cohesive. And then if you can go to, I think, to the last slide, thank you. This illustrates our plan for bikeways within the next 5 years, and this shows it by facility. So you can see that there's a variety of things that we intend to implement or build. Some of these facilities will be built as part of other projects, so private development, capital projects, and then some will be built by what we have programmed in our 5-year plan for bikeway facilities. It's a lot more robust. We don't have a slide that shows what we have existing, but this really kind of fills things up, fills in gaps, makes the system more comprehensive and robust. There are still a few gaps in the system, and they generally correspond to where we need construction. So, for example, it's still a bit of a challenge, even with this system, to get north-south through the center of town as an alternative to Milton. And we have a plan for that, but it's going to take a little bit more in the way of resources. It's going to be more money than we have available in the next 20 years. Hopefully, it seems like we'll make a good grant project, so we will explore opportunities for that over the next few years. And I think the council has discussed it before, but it does seem to be there will be good opportunities for grants for ped and bike facilities coming up, which we'll be mindful and aware of over the next few years. So I think that's the conclusion of my slides. I believe, yes, we've gotten to the question part, so I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Martin, so much for giving us clarity on that. I had one question for you, Martin, which is you were talking about when coming up with the priorities, some criteria you used, and you had mentioned social factors, equity, functionality. What was the first one you mentioned?
Generators and attractors. So really land uses that promote walking and biking. Things like schools, bus stops, commercial areas, high density neighborhoods.
Thank you. Do we have questions within the room? Okay, and online, Councilmember Shimoni, do you have any comments?
Oh, I do. Thank you, Trevor and Rick and Martin for the presentation. Very helpful, and I appreciate the conversation. I have a few comments, and I apologize in advance to take up time here, but I think that's why we're having this retreat, is to have this conversation. So I appreciate this time that we're taking. So Trevor, I'd like to talk about process a little bit, both for getting items onto the 5-year CIP and then how a project is handled once it's on the 5-year CIP. Is there, I was really hoping in this conversation today we would really be tying what we're talking about here to our regional plan and priority-based budgeting community values, and really use that as a beacon to guide our efforts. I do think that this retreat is a step in that right direction to having that conversation and having that a better process. But do you have any thoughts on how we can improve our process in identifying what are the future projects that will be added to the 5-year CIP? I'll start with that question.
Thank you, Your Honor, Councilmember Shimoni. So maybe I'll talk a little bit about the process, about how the plan is developed. I'm hoping Dan Folk with the planning department is online and he can speak a little bit about the regional plan and how that works as far as transportation and how that affects the plan. But as far as process, when we develop the 5-year, we get the vision owners who have a plan, program, or a need project that is in their overall program. So then they come to the capital improvements planning program, maybe even the budget team, and they lay out their need. So then we start talking about funding. If they have it, is it going to be a grant? Is it going to be something related to their program that they have funding for? Then it gets incorporated into the plan, and then it begins to get programmed through the year. So if they have a need to plan it, to study it, if there's a need for a design, then as far as construction, how long that's going to take, they typically do some estimating work beforehand if they have that need within their division. And then it gets into the program shown on what we go through every year. And then that's kind of how we manage it. So then if capital needs to deliver, whatever phase that is, planning, design, construction, then we move forward through that program in the current year or into out years. So that's kind of how we do our process now. Your question about how we can better that, I think having this retreat is a good start to start talking about how that can be affected and how we can work through that. I know in engineering, we have to have lots of discussion about how we're going to move this forward with resources. At the beginning of March, we did have a divisional review, And I did explain that in capital right now, we are down 2 PMs and a capital improvements engineer. So as far as resources, it becomes a big task. It's work that we need to figure out. And right now in capital, our PMs are working hard, and they're at a point where the capacity is at 100% and maybe even more. So there is that possibility of talking about getting resources on. We are advertising right now for PMs, and I'm hoping if the public is watching and there's PMs available that are looking for a job, we have a posting right now that's online, and please apply. We need project managers. And we did talk about that early on, about the lack of trade and skilled labor, getting that into the city. So that is another step, just trying to get people to help us within our planning of how this program works. So maybe those are two items we can do. And then if Dan is available, or maybe Rick.
I would actually like to jump in if I may.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Shimoni. One thing that I'd want to make a connection to the regional plan is, how we have partnered with Metro Plan Flagstaff, used to be known as the Metro FMPO, Flagstaff Metro Planning Organization. Thank you, Chairman McCarthy. That's a really important part. So there's the regional transportation plan that's worked on by the Metro Plan Flagstaff, and that's tied into the regional plan. So we have focused these projects that are now in our 5-year program and had been voted on by the electorate back in 2018. So that process is a big part of where we are today, and I just wanted to make sure we added that. And in that statement is also the comment of color of money here, right? So what we're talking about in this case is transportation tax money. And yes, there is a tremendous amount of planning that has gone into where we sit today. And we're delivering promises made to the community.
Thank you. And do we want to see if Dan wants to chime in?
Hi, good morning, Mayor, council members, Councilmember Shimoni. Good morning to you. So yeah, it's always exciting to talk about our regional plan. It serves a lot of functions within the organization. And so one of those functions can be to help guide decisions on capital programming and where you want to put your funding priorities. So within, the first place I would look is section 10 or chapter 10, which is about transportation. And there's a whole range of topics in that section. It talks about mobility and access, safe and efficient multimodal transportation. So within these sections, there's goals and policies very much related to, developing other ways for people to get around the community other than in the single occupant automobile. I think that's one of the overarching goals, is to try to get, improve our other modes, right? Bicycle, pedestrian, and transit.
Right.
And that's, what we talk about with multimodal.
Right, that's helpful. Dan, did you
talks about environmental considerations, quality design. There's a whole section on pedestrian infrastructure and a section on bicycle infrastructure, transit. And so again, I think there's definitely, the vision of the community is to, invest in our multimodal system, which is other ways to get around in my mind. Another function of the regional plan is it does include our road classification system, and there's goals and policies that refer to this. And so this is another way that council can kind of make decisions on what those facilities should look like, right? So the road classification is essentially your arterials, your collectors, your locals. You have major arterials, you have minor arterials. I think the discussion you had on Tuesday about Butler Avenue, I believe that's a minor arterial. And so that's a good example where I think the regional plan does support, connecting that corridor, right? Where Butler is 4 lanes on either side, and there's this section from I-40 to Fox Glen. And so that feels like an appropriate segment where you would, add some travel lanes for vehicles, but also obviously very robust, separated bicycle and pedestrian. But that's an example where you're connecting You've got I-40, you've got a regional park with ball fields, you've got schools there, you've got new housing coming in. And so I think that's just a good example where you do want to probably add some lane miles, and I think the plan supports that.
Thank you.
I love Martin's presentation. I think it was great. And so that's kind of a high level overview of how the plan can support your capital program.
Yeah, you know, and when in the council, I definitely invite you and everybody to review the regional plan policies. And I'm not going to belabor us by reading these policies I have here in my notes, but it speaks very much to what Dan said in regards to mode shift, reducing peak traffic hour demand, getting people out of their vehicles, you know, all these things about environment, safety, et cetera. And I definitely think that this retreat is so important, city manager, and that we keep doing these in years to come to include the council, and ensuring that we're aligning our projects to our regional plan and our priority-based budgeting community values. But I do think we're kind of missing the mark to a certain degree. And council, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. But, you know, there's a lot of talk about mode shift and a big argument for right sizing of our roads, quite frankly. You know, a part of the regional plan says that 57% of residents do not believe that motorists should be given priority over pedestrians and cyclists when planning. That came out of the 2010 Community Value Survey. Our community is with it, folks, and they've been with it for decades. And I think it's on us now to take that and really run with it. So, Trevor, when you spoke to the Butler conversation we had recently at council, I was really grateful for that. And the only thing I would add to your comments, Trevor, is just that the exploration of widening and the alternatives of widening from our assumption of widening meaning 4 lanes in total, right? That was made clear with Jeremy in the presentation. And I think that's a real challenge for our engineers and our city is really challenging what widening means. And so, council, it's really on us to lead here with the topic of widening with these projects in 419. But without getting into that, because I know this isn't the time or place to do that, I want to go back to my comments here. So in terms of process, I think these retreats are going to be really helpful moving forward and for the next year as well. And then in terms of once a project is on the 5-year CIP, I like for there to be more of a process, Trevor, if possible, in regards to how that project is vetted, checked for compliance with the regional plan, more of a public process as we're doing with our projects today, and including the council, which I know you all are doing and working towards. And I'm really grateful. I really am. I don't want that to come across the wrong way. But I think the way we treat rezoning cases is very much how we should treat our projects on our 5-year CIP, where they're really vetted, with Dan and his team and in the community and the council versus just done internally. And I also think there needs to be an internal review process for the projects at hand that we talk about, which I know we do for a lot of other things, but we don't do for a lot of our capital. So if we can, city manager, in regards to process, work towards, obviously with council support, more of a robust rezoning approach process, and then also an internal review. I think that'd be really beneficial. And shifting to the conversation again, other things that we're talking about here. Martin, your presentation was wonderful, and it made it seem like there's a lot going on, which there is. But I'm curious, Martin, what are your thoughts in looking at 20 years of funding and 20 years ahead of us? Are we meeting the mark? I know we've heard you say numerous times that we're not, but I just wanted to give you the chance to speak to how are we falling short of meeting the mark?
Well, we identified a lot of potential projects that for ped and bike and across those 5 categories. When we talked about what are the priority projects and what do we have capacity for, given our funding over the next 20 years, there were some difficult conversations kind of at the back end. So which projects are we able to build, and which ones do we not have funding for with this 20-year supply of money? And there's really little difference between those projects. Like we can find a lot of projects that do not fit within the 20 years of funding, that a very good argument could be made for, that they're very important, they're needed now. I mean, we're talking about building them over the next 20 years, and they're really needed at this time. So I think we're getting a good start on catching up and being able to build a lot of projects for ped and bike that we have not had in the past. So we're doing a lot of good catch up. Again, I referenced the existing bikeway network. If I showed it to you, you see there's a lot of gaps in it. So just being able to fill in a lot of those gaps does a lot of good. I mentioned that we're mostly filling that in with painting and marking. So we don't really have the capacity to build a lot of construction, to build a lot of bikeways that require construction. And the same can go for foots. I showed you the map of grade separated crossings, and these can be really beneficial facilities and game changers in a ped and bike network, but they're very expensive, and we only have one planned over the next 20 years. Again, hopefully there'll be other sources that come up in that time frame, like grant funding, for example, to help fill that in. But I think we're making good progress. I think we identified a lot of projects that we won't be able to build that'd be really beneficial. I think over the course of 20 years, a lot can change. I think that pedestrian walking and biking will be enduring modes of transportation always, regardless of what happens in technology over the next 20 years, over the next 50 years. But it's hard to plan over 20 years because a lot of things do change. So I think we have to be kind of mindful as we move forward, and in a couple of years assess what we've built, what impact that has, if we're still on the right track, if we need to head in a new direction, if what we're building is effective, or if it needs to go in a little bit different direction. That was a pretty long and rambling answer, but I hope I answered your question. I mean, in short, we have many more projects than we have funding for, and a lot of them would be very beneficial.
You did, Martin.
We'll keep looking for funding.
And the key takeaway I think I took away from your comments is that we need to be nimble with how we design and not just be rigid to a 20-year plan. So council, I guess my comments to us, mayor, vice mayor, and council is that, there's things that are unfunded that really need to be prioritized. I believe better aligned with the regional plan and the priority-based values than J.W. Powell, Lake Mary to the airport, Lone Tree, Pine Knoll, and then West Route 66. So things that are very much outlined in the bikeways plan, and I'll give you some specifics, council, to chew on. And those specifics are things like the Milton Alternative, a north-south main route, basically along Riordan. That's a major one that we really could benefit. Milton has 1 out of 5, I think every 1 out of 5 bicycle crashes occurs on Milton. So that's an alternative that we can look at. And Rick and I have dived into all these, by the way, and had good conversation about these things. So again, thank you, Rick, for all of our conversations. But looking at crash data to identify where the demand is and through a lens of equity on best locations to build protected intersections. Martin said that we don't have funding to do things like this, and this is what I'm talking about. So protected intersections, and what comes to mind specifically are Butler and San Fran, Butler and Beaver, along with 4th Street, 4th and 66. We need protected intersections at these locations, and we also need to look at right sizing of 4th Street in parallel to that intersection. And I know that's going to be a very difficult conversation for all of us, but that's the type of stuff that's on my mind here. And then phase 3 of the bike pilot is the other one, Mayor and Council, that I think needs to be on our list. Mayor, as you know, we had so much momentum going into the bike pilot, and we talked about coming out of winter with a game plan for spring and summer in the years to come. Well, guess what? There's no game plan, right? And there's no discussion of it in the 5-year CIP. So phase 3 of our bike pilot needs to be addressed. The Bicycle Advisory Committee has done a great amount of work on these things, and all of these things are in the Bikeways plan and are within the ATMP. And then lastly, circling back to Trevor, your points about projects in place. I'm wondering if the Beulah University roundabout, given that's like almost double the cost, like 9 million over budget or so. Can that be a discussion that council has in regards to potentially just implementing a protected intersection rather than a massive roundabout that I think is too big and honestly not comfortable for bikes and pedestrians and are most vulnerable? Can we just look at a much cheaper option that is like a protected intersection? Is that conversation council can have maybe at a later date?
Yes, Rick. And then I also want to hold space for the fact that Councilmember Shimoni asked what the other council members here thought about this. So I want to make sure that we save time for them to be inclusive in this discussion. Thank you. Yes, Rick.
I will be very quick. The simple answer is no. We are trying to build this project. We have commitments with partners, vintage partners tied to a zoning case. The simple answer is no, but I stand ready at council's direction.
And so Rick, just for clarification, is that contractual legal limitations that you're referring to?
So we have a development agreement in place with vintage partners. City's obligated to build the roadway. Construction costs have certainly escalated. But development is, counting on the fact that those roadways or the infrastructure along the frontage of the Milltown project are in place. Conversations need to occur. If there's a pause that council wants to have, again, staff stands ready, but we're gonna need to bring vintage partners into the discussion at some point.
I feel like this is a decision the council has already.
So you're right, Councilmember Oslin. We already did make a decision about this, and Rick, you're correct too. But this is $9 million over budget. It's basically double the cost, and that's $9 million that I think can be better spent. And so, if there is council direction, then I personally would be in favor of us taking a pause and reevaluating. I'll leave it at that, Mayor and Council. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Shimoni, and thank you for your clear, concise, and very thoughtful input, because I think that actually there's a lot of really good thoughts there. I also wanted to review some of the comments that City Manager Clifton made also, which was wanting to also take into account what pauses might do to timing and cost. And these are more just questions and considerations to think about, because if we ended up moving forward with the project after a pause, we want to make sure we're understanding of what the financial implications are of that regarding inflation and timing and policy. So Mayor Deasy, did you have something?
Yeah, I had a few things. First off, how far are we in the design phase already with QLAP? I mean, we've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars designing it at this point that has been approved by council. And I'm just worried to just circle back to something we'd already decided. And we are contractually obligated to build that roadway. That cost is only going to increase. So it's 9 million now. If we put a pause on it for a year, that could be 12 million. So I'm a little uncomfortable with that particular part of your thoughts in the matter. But you do bring up a lot of great points, particularly the one on Milton Road for bike safety, and using Reardon Ranch should be a real priority, and using the data to really help us direct the bike ped safety aspect on all of these projects. So, and then a few other comments, but I'm happy to let others weigh into the.
And Adam, Councilmember Shimoni, would you mind holding your comment, and we'll give you a chance to respond, but I want to make sure I get input from other council members first before we circle back. Are there any other comments from anyone else as far as your thoughts on this? Yes, Councilmember Sweet.
Question, and you've probably already given this to us, but I would love to see the crash data in a format at some point I can reference.
For Milton? Yes, we'd be glad to.
A request for crash data on Milton. Great. Thank you.
Potentially citywide would be good. If we have the, because I think I recall an old graph that we did have that information on. I think I saw a year and a half ago, so it may not be that, but that up again.
And Mayor Deasy, is that request based on some pre-existing stuff, or is the request, if it's not existing, to go out and spend resources and effort on collecting crash data citywide?
I'd say pre-existing.
Pre-existing.
We have it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
It's better to look at the last 5 years, 8 years, as opposed to, hey, let's do it again this year and see what that 1 year.
And I assume the question is related to bicycle and pedestrian crashes, or do you also want to see all vehicle crashes, whether fatality, injury, or non-injury? I mean, they come in all sorts of categories.
Focus would be the pedestrian.
Okay. Thanks for the clarity.
Yes, Councilmember McCarthy.
Thank you. Just a pretty broad comments that I'd like to make is that, I do support bike and ped improvements. Absolutely. I think that'd be a wonderful transition if we could pull that off. But we also need to remember that, 99% of the traffic in this town is in cars. And the people, yes, they support this transition, but they also expect to have a decent infrastructure for automobiles. I think that most of what I heard today, including from Mr. Entz about bike and ped, what we heard about road projects, I think is pretty well balanced. I don't have any major problems with it. Yes, we should do more if we can, but I think what we heard was definitely in the ballpark of where it should be. Again, I do support a transition to bike and peds, and I think, well, what can we do to promote that? The biggest thing we can do to promote bicycle and pedestrian traffic is the way we zone our lands. And in all honesty, a lot of people don't like high density, but high density is the thing that will move us to pedestrian and bicycle traffic. If we zone our land in a way that is very spread out, I'll use the word sprawled, that does not lend itself to bicycle and pedestrian. So there's a trade-off of density. We don't like it in certain ways, but on the other hand, we need to realize that the way we zone our land has benefits. The last thing I'll say is about Milton Road. I don't do a lot of bicycling now, but the first 10 years that I lived here before I got on council and was retired, I did a lot of bicycling around this town. I have never once ridden down Milton Road. That is crazy. But I got from my house, which is over near the old Harkins Theater on the southwest side of town, I routinely rode my bike down to downtown, go have breakfast at Macy's, whatever, go downtown to Heritage Square. And I got through the Milton corridor, but I never rode on Milton itself.
Right.
And there are other routes that I used, and I found my way around town. So I kind of wonder if it even makes sense to make major improvements on Milton. I think alternate routes might make more sense. So in summary, yes, we need to gradually encourage bike to ped, but there's different ways to do it. Zoning, improving the infrastructure. We need to do all these things. But just the capital improvement plan that I've heard today, I think is pretty well rounded, and I don't have any major problem at all with it. Thank you.
Councilmember McCarthy, so in summary, you really want to consider zoning, infrastructure, and alternative routes as options. I want to go back to Councilmember Shimoni. He had mentioned wanting to respond to a comment. Councilmember Shimoni?
Yeah, thank you. Mayor, to your comment about the increased cost of pausing, the roundabout's massive. It requires a lot of right-of-way that we need to acquire. And if we built a protected intersection, I think it'd be better. I think it'd be safer, more comfortable for pedestrians, and a lot cheaper. That I think we know for a fact that it would fit within the right-of-way. It's a lot smaller. And so I just wanted to add that to your thoughts of your comments. And then to Jim's, Councilmember McCarthy's points, I don't know if I would say that it's well balanced, what we have. I think we definitely need to fill in a lot more for bike and ped to create that holistic network. And we don't have alternatives to Milton today. And we don't have a complete network. We know this. And so, council, this is our chance. I think specifically my only other comment I'll make here is just, when we talk about those future projects that Trevor outlined in regards to like what's, what's changeable, I think that's where we need to look. And also to Martin's points about preparing for grant funding, Rick and I have talked about this quite a bit. The step one is to get a design in place. If we can get designs for the Milton Alternatives, 4th Street Corridor, Butler, Phase 3 of the bike project, all the things I listed, design work, get that done. Rick, I think you told me that's a total of about $550,000. And I see you nodding your head. And council, if we can get design work done, that'll at least set us up for success with potential grant money. If we don't do design work, we won't. It's that simple. We won't get the grant money that the federal government will be putting out, or we'll be a lot less likely to. And then, so design work, step one, council and Councilmember McCarthy, I hope that you can get behind that idea that, we can at least pursue design work and set up ourselves for success for potential grant funding. And maybe, pump the brakes on some of these future projects that are in the queue.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Shimoni. So just in summary, wanting to put out to the board or to the council that wanting to focus on using some funds for designs in place to seek grant funding in the future. We have Councilmember Aslan here. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Councilmember Shimoni, I really appreciate your voice in all of this. I appreciate the tension that you bring to the room. I fear that your presence is going to be missed in the coming years as this conversation continues to unfold. And your advocacy and your fighting spirit is really valuable, and I just want to acknowledge that and create some space for that. In terms of positioning myself in this conversation, I'm somewhere between you and Councilmember McCarthy. I really see both of these points of view. McCarthy is right, and it's important for council to say and to articulate to the community that we are still investing in vehicle infrastructure. That's not going to go away. It's important. This is a mountain town. It's a snowy town. We can't have this conversation without constantly giving service to those folks out there who are never going to get on a bike and never walk to and from the grocery store or put their luggage on their bicycle to go to the airport. So this is a both and conversation. I just think it's important to tirelessly reiterate that so that our public understands where we're coming from and where we're trying to go. I think that it's important for this to be a forward-looking conversation. I don't think it's helpful for us to look backwards and try to reinvent the roundabout, so to speak. And that's very specific to the Beulah University project. I understand, but that's just where I put myself in that conversation. But again, I really do appreciate what you're trying to do. I think you're spot on with your instinct that we need to fight for a transition to the name is escaping me right now, but righted roadways, or we need to right size our infrastructure. We need to continue to invest in bike and ped in an accelerated rate, and we need the zoning aspect to this conversation to continue full throttle too. And that's something we need to do a better job with the public with. People get squeamish about high density in this town and tall buildings. But if we're going to keep Flagstaff accessible, and if we're going to be able to move people around efficiently and with less vehicle miles traveled, we're going to have to keep our eye on the ball in terms of our zoning decisions. Certainly. So I guess what I'm doing is I'm just throwing my weight behind your efforts, Councilmember Shimoni, but with a forward-looking lens and not really trying to go backwards. And just as a complete aside, well, it's not a complete aside, but it's kind of peripheral or tangential. I really like roundabouts. I think that's not a secret on this council or for the city. I deeply appreciate them. I think they work well. I've always been an early adopter of new technologies. I love the two-lane roundabouts in Cameron, for example. I think they work really well. I love the way that traffic flows in Sedona. I love the roundabouts over by the airport on John Wesley Powell by Fort Tuttle. I can't wait to see the roundabout go in at 4th Street and Cedar. And I didn't really mention this the other night, but I'm okay with a roundabout at 4th Street and Butler. I rely on the engineers and those folks to make the determination whether or not they're safe and effective. And where we can put those in, I think they're wonderful. But that's just me, citizen Austin, putting in my 2 cents on that specific topic. And there's a lot more conversation to be had still from the perspective of many different intersections and many different throughways around town. And that's where I'll leave it for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Aslan. So we are 10 minutes into the presentation on water services, which is incredibly important to the infrastructure of our city. So I want to give some time for other comments because Councilmember Salas did have something she wanted to share. And then we're going to have to take time to personally write down what our criteria are for prioritizing capital projects, thinking about that in the framework that was suggested. High need, maintaining basic services that are required to the city, which we're about to talk about when it comes to water services. But also there was many different criteria mentioned, including things like equity and functionality and things like that. So after the comments from Councilmember Salas, I would love for you to make your own personal list of the criteria that you would be considering when trying to prioritize. Councilmember Salas, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the space and time to articulate my perspective. Being heavily involved not only with Metro Plan, but also with the statewide advocacy to bring state and federal dollars to local transportation projects from Fredonia to Yuma. I think it is imperative for us to expand our perspective in terms of transportation planning at a regional level. Here are the imperatives of the here and now. 61% of our workforce travel by car to get to work every day. The recent survey by MetroPlan reveals that 75% travel by car, and this within city limits. 15% walk, 6% bike, and 2% take the public transit. Also, MetroPlan is engaging in this regional transportation planning process as we speak, and there's a survey online that's up until tomorrow. With respect to Milton, every effort and planning that has to deal with Milton needs to be interfaced with ADOT because Milton is a roadway that's operated and managed by ADOT. So looking ahead, you're balancing pedestrian and bicyclist safety, which is also a priority of MetroPlan currently, but also balance it with transit and vehicle usage.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Councilmember.
Because I had a few extra things to say.
Well, how do we want to address timing of the water services since we're almost 15 minutes into their presentation?
A few minutes late, but there's a couple things that Shimoni said in terms of prioritization. Number one, I'm not interested in the reduction or delay in any timing with the loan tree. We've already done a lot of investment. We need to realize with all of these projects that this is a matter of matching funds, and federal and state dollars are key to getting any of these projects done. That I agree with you, Councilmember Shimoni, about designing. So we have a lot of those opportunities, but we're seeing, for example, Congressman O'Halloran pushed for $8 million to create a roundabout at SUNY and Lone Tree. And these kinds of projects that we're getting assistance from federal help are very key in how we're prioritizing this. We always got to think about the dollars and cents and where we can find those funds. So anyways, that was my last thought.
Thank you for your comment. Yes.
Briefly.
Yes, briefly, Councilmember McCarthy.
First point, I think Mr. Aslan made a very important point. It's not either or, it's both between pedestrian traffic versus vehicles. I absolutely agree with that. My other point, just quickly on roundabouts, I'm not as hard over on roundabouts as Mr. Aslan. I think a lot of times in 2-lane roads, they make a lot of sense. I'm a little concerned about using them on bigger streets, 4 lanes. Separate discussion as far as Beulah and University. That may or may not have been a good decision, but I don't support revisiting that. And the reason I don't is I think some of the reasons the city manager mentioned, if we went through a whole rehash of that project, the money we save could be eaten up by inflation. So I would say we already made that decision. Let us move on. I'm not saying it was a perfect decision, but I think delaying it would be counterproductive. Those are my brief but spectacular comments.
Thank you so much. We do want to create space for water services to present. Before we move forward, so as my first request was to think about the criteria for prioritization of capital projects, also start thinking about and creating your own list of where you think the council members might agree or where there might be consensus on some of the items that you just discussed. Just briefly, in your own way, making note on that, because after water services presents, we will get to that. Are there any other comments for you, Rick?
Just real quickly, I agree with Councilmember Shimoni. I'm looking forward to that conversation about phase 3 on the Butler. Whatever we decide, I have no idea, but the conversation needs to get started on that. So I just wanted to give voice to that as well.
Okay, so I'm hoping we have space to discuss after the next presentation. If we can have Andy and Brian and everyone who's going to be presenting with water services.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. We feel like we're interrupting a very robust conversation, so we apologize for that. I can promise you that Gary's going to make some very spectacular comments but brief. And we're going to try to be brief. We have a lot to cover, and we've timed our presentation, several slides: drinking water, wastewater, reclaimed water, stormwater. You all hear once a month our demands in stormwater and those demands that we're trying to meet. We talked to you at the end of September about our concerns with the wastewater system, for the resiliency of that system, and then the future capacity of that system. And so Gary's going to go through our slideshow, and I'm sure I'll butt in when not appropriate. So with that, take it away, Gary. And I'll be watching the comments on here as well.
Thanks, Andy. I wanted to start by just saying, you know, I started in this position about 3.5 months ago, and I've jokingly said to a few people that I've crammed 2 years worth of learning into the last 3.5 months. So I'm still learning, will continue to learn. And then the other thing I wanted to do before I got started was share my appreciation with not only capital, but those on the water services team that helped put together the capital budget. The capital team has been huge in delivering some of our high priority projects as it relates to stormwater, as you're well aware, with the museum fire flooding. And anytime I ask for help on capital delivery of other water services projects, they don't hesitate to help. So it's been really great. And then I just wanted to say thank you to Brian Hunsinger, Patrick O'Connor, Jim Uckel, Ed Shank, Aaron Young, Lisa Dean within Water Services for helping put this capital budget together, because without them, I wouldn't have been able to do it. So with that, I'll get started and hopefully we'll make up a little bit of time. I'm going to try and give you an overview. I certainly don't have the time to go into the detail of all of the projects that we have. Happy to answer any questions that you have about any particular project, so feel free to stop me at any time. So for the Drinking Water Fund, our funding sources for drinking water obviously come from our water bills. We also have capacity fees that we charge when people connect to our system. We're looking at a future rate study. This applies to both drinking water and wastewater, so you'll see that in the wastewater slides as well. And that rate study is looking to potentially increase our water and wastewater rates for our customers to help cover our increasing operational costs as well as our capital costs. And then finally, I have loans and grants identified on there as well. The capital plan process that we go through, a lot of our capital plan is informed by our master plans, as you heard from several of the other presentations. We met with operations staff, operation and maintenance staff, and then we did do a short presentation to the Water Commission. So they've had an opportunity to see our first draft of the capital budget, and then we make adjustments based on reviews and revenues after that. Next slide, please. So this is a real quick overview of some of our ongoing projects. We have the Rio de flood control, and this is in the drinking water fund because we have conflicts within the Rio de flood control area with some of our water lines. So as we move forward with the Rio de Flag project, we'll start to implement some of those projects in that area for for drinking water. We have some energy efficiency upgrades and some SCADA well upgrades as well. In terms of aging infrastructure, we do try to have or construct replacement projects. The map on the right-hand side is an image from the Water Master Plan from 2015 or 14. I always get those confused. The green checks that you see are projects that we've completed over the last several years, and we're continuing to make progress on some of those. And we'll touch on a couple of those projects later on in the presentation. I'm not going to touch on the rest of those, so next slide, please. So here's some of the highlighted projects that we're going to go over in a little more detail. We have the Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant sediment and flock basins rehab. This was originally budgeted last year and the year before, possibly. We had some cost increases that we've alluded to previously. And so we're trying to get that work started next spring. Along with that, we have the Lake Mary Water Treatment Plant land acquisition. So the city of Flagstaff currently leases land from the Forest Service for our water treatment plant. And we're trying to purchase the land from the Forest Service in addition to some additional property in the same vicinity for future upgrades and expansion as needed. Then we have the Spicer Canyon Transmission Main, Phase 4 and 5. That is part of that aging infrastructure that I mentioned earlier. We have those budgeted in the next few years. We have the Fort Tut Hill Well 2 pump house, and then the Lake Mary raw water pump line rehab as well. And we'll get into more of those details. Next slide, please. So the Lake Mary sediment basins, this is a $6.5 million project, escalated due to inflation costs that we've seen recently. Let's see, a couple of the highlights for this project. So Lake Mary and the Lake Mary well field water comes into the Lake Mary treatment plant, and that portion of our system actually feeds up to 40% of the city's water supply. So it's a pretty critical water supply for the city of Flagstaff. The equipment we have in there is over 60 years old, and this was identified as a priority project within the Water Master Plan, as well as the condition assessment done in 2015. Next slide, please. Spicer Canyon Transmission Main, and I combined phases 4 and 5. Phase 4 was budgeted for this fiscal year. We actually had to reprioritize some of our project management resources to some of the museum fire flood response. And so that's why this project has gotten delayed some. And we're continuing to make progress on the Phase 4 design and hoping to start construction as soon as possible. As you can see on the slide, this infrastructure is over 70 years old. I had someone tell me once that when we see breaks in this line, we can see impacts to the rest of the system, huge pressure drops throughout the rest of the system. So this is another critical piece of infrastructure that feeds the entire city of Flagstaff from our main reservoir tanks up in the Schultz Pass area. Next slide, please. Next, we have our well projects, and most recently we have the Fort Tuthill well, which was drilled, and the drilling of that well was completed this last winter. We have $2 million budgeted over the next several years to drill 5 wells and install 5 new well houses. And so the next year we're planning to construct or design and construct a well house for this well that we just drilled. And we've started siting additional wells at Canyon Del Rio for some of those future years out. And then after Canyon Del Rio, I think one of the next areas we're looking at is the Northern Arizona Healthcare site, and beginning to work with that developer to potentially site wells in that area as well. Next slide, please. So this is a similar need and priority as the Schweitzer Canyon transmission main. This is the Lake Mary raw water pipeline rehab. This was originally constructed in the 1960s. Over the last 17 years, we've experienced 8 breaks. And again, this is a pipeline that supplies the Lake Mary water treatment plant and can supply up to 40% of the city's water supply. This project was not identified in one of our master plans. We did have a conditions assessment done in the last couple of years, and it was recognized as something that needed to be addressed urgently. And so we have money in the 5-year plan to address some of the design aspects of this. I don't have a good estimate as to what the full rehab construction cost would be on this project. Next slide. So I'm going to take a pause here on drinking water and see if you have any questions. We still have the wastewater fund, the stormwater fund, and reclaim to go through. All right. Next slide, wastewater fund. So the funding sources for wastewater are very similar to what we went over with water. We collect fees from our users. We have capacity fees. The unique funding sources that we have for wastewater are the general obligation bond requests that we put in to the bond committee, which you will see at some point in time in the future. And then the other one that I wanted to explain was this Noresco bullet point. Noresco is a company that comes out and does energy audits on our existing systems. And they identify capital projects that if we were to upgrade those portions of our system, they pay for the upgrade, and then we pay they basically get paid from the difference in energy costs that are recognized through that project. So it's just another funding source that we utilize on occasion for energy efficiency upgrades to some of our plants. The capital program process is, again, very similar to what we did in drinking water. So I'm gonna pass on that for now. And next slide, please. So I want to take a little bit of time on this slide. This is a really important discussion that you as council need to have in terms of our critical needs for wastewater treatment. The image on the right-hand side is an image from the biosolids master plan that was completed in 2019. What this graph shows is what our capacity currently is today, and what our projected needs are in the future. And when I saw this presentation back in September, it was something that struck me, and I wanted to look a little more into it. And so I did a little more analysis myself and found that our current capacity, treatment capacity at our treatment plant, we have overcommitted our remaining capacity on the developments that are currently under construction or about to be permitted. So we don't have more capacity, we've actually overcommitted that capacity. And so it's critical that we implement some of the projects that I have in this presentation to address the capacity issues that we have already committed to. And I will clarify that the committed capacity is a calculation done on paper. It's a little different than what our actual capacities we see when a lot of these projects go online. And some of the other projects that we have included on this list also address some of our redundancy and maintenance concerns as it pertains to treatment capacity, or as it pertains to treatment just in general. Our current capacity is based off of running some of our systems 24/7 at their full capacity. There's no redundancy. We don't have the ability to do maintenance on some of our systems, and those systems are a single point of failure within our treatment processes. So I want to pause there real quick and make sure that council has a good understanding of what I'm saying in terms of we have overcommitted our current available capacity. And I was talking with a consultant yesterday, and this is not an unusual case for the city of Flagstaff. This is actually something that a lot of agencies are experiencing right now. Are there any questions on that?
Yes.
I'm going to make a quick comment. My career was in the aerospace industry. Everything had redundancy. That's the way we prevent airplanes from crashing. So to me, this is a no-brainer. We have to address this, absolutely. End of discussion.
I would agree with you.
Thank you. And brief. I love it.
I try to be brief.
What else? Other questions on what was shared? Any online questions? Okay.
All right, then I'll move on. Next slide, please. So here's a quick overview of I'm not going to go into a great detail on some of these projects. Again, the one ongoing project I have listed is the Rio de Flag sewer relocations, again, for the same reason as drinking water. Aging sewer infrastructure, we have a couple of projects that have been previously funded, the Coconino Estates project, which is currently under construction, and First Avenue Route 66. These are rehab projects of some of our aging sewer infrastructure. For future out years, we have reprioritized the funding associated with that aging sewer infrastructure, and there are needs in our sewer system, but that's been reprioritized to our treatment needs that we have. Next slide, please. So here's a list of the highlighted projects that speak to the increased capacity. We have a couple projects at Rio, a couple projects at Wildcat, and I'll get into those in more detail. And then at the very end, I've listed some of our critical and aging treatment infrastructure, and the majority of those are part of the general obligation bond request, as well as projects that to a degree address that redundancy issue and capacity issue. Next slide, please. So the Rio Clarifier and Mixers project, this is a $2.2 million project, portion of that funding. And in this fiscal year, we're trying to get started with that as soon as possible. This is the first project that needs to come online to address some of that capacity issue. Currently, we only use a single train of the Rio de Flag's capacity, and so that plant is rated at 4 million. It's rated at 4 million gallons a day, and when we only use one train, our capacity is roughly 2 million gallons a day. And so the reason we only use one train is because we have the need to do some maintenance on the Rio treatment plant. And this is a project that will allow us to open up both trains within the Rio de Flag treatment plant and take some of the capacity demands off of the Wildcat plant, in addition to a couple of other projects. This infrastructure is, as you can see on the slide, 28 years old. It's beyond, some of the infrastructure in here is beyond its useful life, and it's critical for these capacity needs that we have. Next slide, please. The next project is the Wildcat Digester project. Originally budgeted when I came on board at $8 million. We had to double this price as a result of inflation and more recent cost estimates with the design consultants. So we're working on design right now. The digester project starts to address some of our solids capacity needs. When we look at a treatment plant, we actually look at both solids capacity as well as our hydraulic capacity or our liquid capacity of the plant. And at Wildcat, we have a need for both. If you're unfamiliar with how our treatment system works, the Rio de Flag only treats wastewater. It does not have the capability to treat solids. So all of the solids that come from the treatment process at the Rio de Flag is actually sent downstream to Wildcat, where Wildcat treats all of our solids. And so in addition to that, over the last several years, we've made some great efforts as it pertains to, what's the word I'm looking for?
You're asking me.
Water conservation efforts. And so what that has done to the loading of our wastewater is it has increased how much solids loading we have within our wastewater. So our liquid capacity or demands that we're seeing at the plant haven't grown all that much, or they've grown at a much slower rate than what we would have expected, but the solids loading has continued to increase as a result of those conservation efforts. And this project is addressing our solids capacity needs for the whole city. And more of the details of that project are on that slide, but I'm not going to go through those. And next slide, please. So this is the next project that starts to address some of our capacity needs. Basically, we've titled this the Rio Flow Diversion Project. So when you think about the city of Flagstaff, you can divide it into two areas as it pertains to wastewater treatment. So there's a portion of the city that goes to the Rio de Flag plant, and there's a portion of the city that goes to the Wildcat plant. And with this project, what we're trying to accomplish is taking some of the flow that goes to Wildcat and divert some of that flow to the Rio de Flag treatment plant. And the main reason for that is the sewer flows that we're seeing come into the Rio de Flag don't take full advantage of the Rio de Flag's treatment capacity. And this is a project that we can design and construct in a relatively short time frame, which buys us a little more additional capacity to work on the design and construction of an expansion project for the Wildcat treatment plant. The design and construction of the Wildcat treatment plant is likely to take us 4 to 5 years before any of that comes online. And we have a need before that project is complete. And that's what this project allows us to do. It buys us a little time. So the map you see on the right, there's a red line that goes through the middle. And so in order to try and orient you a little bit, just to the right side of that line, above the railroad tracks, is Schweitzer Canyon. And so everything to the right of that, Schweitzer Canyon, to the right of Sam's Club, all of that flows to the Wildcat plant. Everything to the left of that flows to the Rio de Flag plant. Any flows to the left of that Rio cannot treat just diverts from Rio and goes directly to Wildcat. So any overflow capacity from Rio, but we don't have any of that right now in terms of trying to treat additional capacity. So the two red circles that you see on there are potential locations that we're exploring for a flow diversion. We're basically going to install a lift station or pump station and pump those sewage flows back to the Rio de Flag plant to take full advantage of the unused capacity that we have at the Rio plant. Next slide, please. So there's not a lot of information on this slide, and that's for good reason. We haven't had money in the 5-year plan for expansion of Wildcat. We were able to identify $1 million worth of funding to start a master planning effort. That doesn't get us anywhere close to a design. I would say typical design costs for treatment plants are in the 10% range of construction costs. I have some presentations that were provided to you by Brad Hill back in September that said to do an expansion design is going to cost between $100 and $180 million. So I expect design cost for that staff recommendation to be in the $10 million plus range. We currently don't have budget for those design costs. And that doesn't even start to address the actual construction costs. So when I have the Wildcat expansion construction, we do not have that funded at this point in time, nor do we have the design funded. And then the diagram on the left is just a diagram taken from the biosolids master plan. When they did the biosolids master plan, they did some conceptual layouts of what a treatment plant expansion may look like out at Wildcat. And that's what you're seeing on that. Next slide, please. So this is the last of the critical aging treatment infrastructure projects. Like I mentioned earlier, a lot of these are general obligation bond requests. In fact, yeah, I think the only one that's not is the Rio bar screens project. I'm questioning how much detail I should go to in each of these projects, but each of these projects start to address that redundancy issue that I mentioned earlier. Those projects would include the primary pump station, the Rio bar screens. I apologize, not that one. Yeah, the primary pump station is the one that addresses some of those redundancy issues. And then all of these projects were identified in the biosolids master plan as a need in addition to the expansion at Wildcat. And I can dive into more details, and I know Jim's on the line if we have additional questions about that. And I'm going to go to the next slide, but it's basically to pause for wastewater and see if you have any questions as it relates to wastewater capital projects. And again, I did not go over every single project, but if you have questions about those, just let me know.
When you say general obligation bonds, would those be paid back with water treatment bills and impact fees? Or are you expecting money from the general fund?
Councilmember McCarthy, this is part of the broader initiative that we're working through right now with the bond committee that was appointed by the city manager. And so I think there are several funding options. And I think for water services, the GO bonds would be paid back with some sort of taxation structure. To your question, for wastewater, we're looking at our fee structure as well. And so all of the funding options, a funding matrix, if you will. I think as Gary had noted, with our conservation efforts, that's hugely important towards our drinking water supply concerns that we have for the future. It is having an impact on our wastewater system, in which now we have a solids issue. And then the capacity for the wastewater treatment plants, we are working towards a more near-term solution, as Gary had indicated, from a redirection of flows from the Wildcat plant to the Rio de Flag plant. So that's a shorter term option. And then the longer term options, we're getting into very large cost associated with that. So I think in terms of funding, we're looking at all of our options. We can't tell you how that matrix is going to look, but we know we have some issues or concerns and we need to address them, and looking at all the funding options to do so.
So you're saying it could be
Could
Either or, and both.
Could be, yeah. And in terms of geo bonds, sorry to punt to our city treasurer, Rick Tatter, but he can speak to those funding options and how they exactly work much better than I can. But the geo bonds are issued. We have that debt capacity, and you've all had those kind of bond discussions, and you'll have more of them as the committee makes a recommendation to you in the near future.
So just to kind of summarize, I'm open-minded, but I think philosophically, we should stay within the enterprise fund concept, that the funds that you need for that should be paid for by things associated with it, as opposed to rating the general fund. And I realize it's not quite that simple, and we may have to do a little of both, but philosophically, that's where my head is.
Greg, County Manager or City Manager Clifton.
Greg.
Sorry.
That's okay. Thank you. I hope the audio is okay. I switched to my mobile phone here, but I was having internet connection issues. I'll be brief also. I think the content of what you just heard from Gary, and then with Andy's follow-up comments, together with the comments you're about to hear from our stormwater team, in my mind, represent the most important topics of the day, and it's not by a small margin. That's not to undermine or diminish in any way the importance of all the other topics. But we have started this dialogue a while ago. We had an in-depth discussion of it on September 30th of last year, and the volume on this topic will just continue to ratchet up as time marches on and as these needs become more imminent. We do not have discretion on this one. There are no projects we can shuffle about to try to free up funding for this, and time is of the essence. It is a fundamental service that we provide, and nobody else provides it. So with that as a backdrop, it's of the utmost importance that we continue to give this growing attention. The 2019 Biosolids Master Plan identified the options that Gary had on the screen. I was not able to see those on my phone, but I know very well what he was referring to. Option one is where we need to focus. That's the flow diversion project that both Gary and Andy spoke to. We need to do everything we can to lay the groundwork for that to go forward. I know right now it's in a data collection process. We need to get through the funding process. It needs to happen. It will buy us a little bit of time, maybe 4 or 5 years, I don't know, but a little bit more time to start talking about the bigger fix, which is the Wildcat replacement, enhancement, augmentation, whatever however you want to characterize that. As Brad Hill pointed out back in September, we'll have a range of options to consider, but we're not ready for that discussion yet. That's forthcoming. To Councilmember McCarthy's comment of now, I would have the same comment. We're not ready for that discussion yet, but I so appreciate the sharing, Councilmember McCarthy, of your philosophical beliefs. And I'm right in line with that, but I'm a little more, I guess, of a pragmatist to suggest that we can fund $100 to $180 million capital project with rate revenues. I'm fairly certain we're going to have to be much more creative. There will be grants pursued. There may be federal and state appropriations pursued, speaking directly of earmarks. And I remain convinced there will be a debt issuance, because we cannot save and pay on this. That time will not allow that to happen. So it almost necessitates on the front end discussion of a debt issuance of some form to capitalize that. Now, the good news is there will be opportunities, even with the bond questions that are now being formulated by the Citizen Bond Committee for November of this year. As Rick Tatter has pointed out to you, we have other capacity within our bond structure, our debt structure rather, and that is very purposefully not being touched right now because I think that discussion occurs later. So I thank you for giving me a little bit of airtime here. I don't think I'll speak again. I'm going to listen with interest at the ensuing discussion on stormwater. I want to thank Gary and Andy for walking us through that.
Mayor DC?
Yeah, I have a question that's probably for Stacy PK. Which is, are we seeing any federal guidance right now on dollar matching or anything else, particularly for wastewater or things that can help pay for this?
So I think I heard your question. Hi. So we have been in a lot of discussion with WIFA, with the WIFA branch for loans. We've been, I know Aaron's been very much, and Andy and others, working with the Bureau of Reclamation for funding. There's some stormwater, the new mega grant that just came out with the bill. Infrastructure has some stormwater funding in it. It's due the end of May, and I'm working with Ed on that program now to see if there's some availability to submit for something. Of course, we've got earmarks that we're very aggressive on. Continue to ask me that question, see if I answered it right, Mayor.
Yeah, just with the wastewater fund, I know there's going to be money out there for, wildfire, for stormwater, but is there a decent pot of money going specifically towards wastewater? Is it a different, is it the same pool of grant money that is going to be available through the infrastructure law, or?
It's separate. The way I'm looking, the way that I'm reading the guidance on the bill right now, it's like it's separate. There's water, wastewater, and stormwater funding sources. So three different sources for it.
Okay, thank you. I'll have more questions, but let's get to it.
You can call me anytime.
Yeah.
And then Mayor, Council, just to clarify, WIFA is a Water Infrastructure Finance Authority. Is a longstanding organization that has helped fund a lot of infrastructure throughout our state. And so that's we've been having some robust conversations with them.
Okay.
All right.
Reclaimed water?
Reclaimed water, next slide. So our reclaimed water budget is substantially less than our water and wastewater. So is stormwater. So these will be a little quicker. I think I only have one slide for reclaim. I do. So our reclaim water, we do not have capacity fees for reclaim water. We only have user fees. And then in terms of other funding sources, we're able to debt service some of our capital projects. The primary project that we have budgeted currently is for an 8-inch bottleneck replacement, and this is a line between the Buffalo Park reclaim tank and I'm gonna say Cedar and 4th Street is where this 8-inch line exists, and we need to upsize that, and I don't remember the exact size off the top of my head, to address some of the capacity and pressure needs within the system. A couple of other projects that we've talked about and that are in the 5-year plan include the chlorine building upgrade at Buffalo Park Tank, as well as a PRV station replacement at the Rio de Flag treatment plant. That particular PRV is underwater currently, and they're looking to make some changes to that to improve that particular situation. Next slide.
Pressure regulator valve.
Yes, sorry. That is what that means. Or pressure reducing valve, but same concept. Onto the stormwater fund. Our stormwater projects are funded by our stormwater rates. We have a stormwater fee that goes out with every single water bill. We're currently working to update those rates. I don't recall it was last adjusted in 2018. And given the needs and demands that we're seeing, we're looking at updating those rates. And then we have a lot of grants that we're going after, as well as general obligation bond requests, as you heard earlier. Next slide, please. So the projects that we have are able to fund within the stormwater capital budget are listed here. Several of these, and I was going to give some time to Christine because she was going to go over this. I know I'm running short on time, but Christine is the project manager for both the downtown mile and the Spruce Wash. Christine, are you available to give a quick overview on those?
I am, Gary. Mayor, Council, hi, Christine Cameron with Capital Improvements. Just wanted to point out that the downtown mile it's a large scale project that serves, many goals and includes BNSF requirements for several of our local projects. So this includes the Rio to Flag, our planned pedestrian underpasses, the Rio or the Lone Tree overpass also. So those projects span both water services and transportation programs and involve benefit to other agencies. And we're approaching that funding through cost share. So for design, we have $500,000 from Metro Plan and $200,000 from BNSF, and then the remainder will be covered by stormwater and transportation fees. And for construction in the future, we'll continue to work through kind of an equitable split within our city funds, and we'll be seeking partnership funds and grants. So we had anticipated that the Rio was going to have to cover costs for a lot of the bridge structure since it's right adjacent. It's really the impetus for requiring a new bridge with the track shift. And we're glad to have other projects now to contribute to that. So that's basically the $2 million from the downtown mile is for that planning and design effort, that contribution. And then the 2.8, we went over this in council Tuesday night. This is the construction cost, project cost for the Cedar to Dorothy project. So I'll hand it back to you, Gary, or take any questions.
Thanks, Christine. I see that I'm short on time, so I'll just do a real quick overview. The Spruce Wash project that's listed on here, I actually intended to put on a different slide. So as you can see, we're funding $8.8 million within the stormwater fund, and that should be reduced because that Spruce Wash $1.5 million is actually a FEMA grant that we got. And then if you could go to the next slide, please. This is a list of projects that we are pursuing through grant funding as well as general obligation bonds. So in comparison to the little over $6 million that we're funding, we're pursuing $24 million and I apologize, that number's a little wrong. I had to edit it. We're pursuing $24 million in funding requests through other means. And we also have multiple millions of dollars in unfunded projects. And one of the things I failed to mention, a lot of our projects have been reprioritized to the flooding that we've seen over the last year. And stormwater still has an obligation to serve the rest of the city in terms of stormwater infrastructure and projects. And a lot of those have been pushed back, delayed, or reprioritized. And I'll end there. I did my best.
You did great. You did great. Starting a presentation 15 minutes behind is no small feat. You did great. So thank you. Okay, so there's been a lot of discussion. We have about just a few minutes before we're done with today's meeting, and the hope was to get some consensus, and there was a few things that were recommended. And so I just want to read off this, and you can correct me if I misunderstood. I don't live and breathe this like all of you do, so I might have put some things together that may not belong together. One of the requests that I heard was on process, and it was kind of a collection mostly of Councilmember Shimoni with others, which was a request to add an internal review process when it comes to capital projects, which will consider alignment with regional plan, priority-based, and alignment with priority-based budgeting, as well as evaluating if internal is more cost-effective than external on these projects. Is that something, did I get that right? And is that something that we have consensus on? Yes, Council Member.
Is that not something that we already do? I'll ask staff.
Great question. Is that a process that's already happening? Is there anyone that can speak to that?
Yeah, this is Greg. I'll jump in. I think it is happening, and I think there's always room for improvement. We've been having a lot of internal discussions on that very topic. So I consider it a work in progress, and I'm glad that there is consensus on it. That certainly gives us clarity of the direction we need to follow going forward. So yeah, that's my comment, is we are working on it, and we have room for improvement. Thanks.
Thank you. So if there is anyone on the council that doesn't agree with that, then that will denote that we do have consensus there. So is there any comments of disagreement? Great.
I have a comment.
Yes, Councilmember Shimoni.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, City Manager. My understanding is that engineering projects do not go through an internal review. Am I wrong?
Oh, I think we do have internal review of engineering projects. I don't know. My hunch is, council member, and thank you for the question, is some projects have probably been much more elevated than others in terms of internal discussion. There obviously needs to be some dividing lines in these where we don't have time for a lot of internal vetting and even outward vetting to illustrate, some of our urgent projects on flooding mitigation and so forth.
Right.
We just need to, I think we're all in consensus there. I think the bigger projects have had a lot of internal discussion, but back to my previous comments, I think there's room for improvement on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, Rick.
Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Greg. Again, this is Rick Barrett, City Engineer. I would just add, of course, I first of all agree that it's a work in progress and we can always make it better. We look to community feedback and feedback from this council body. However, we reach out extensively to internal stakeholders. We reach out to our agency stakeholders. That is a critical part of each and every capital project that we pursue. We also use our interdivisional staff, which is known as IDS, to review capital projects. Of course, they are primarily focused on development review, which is where much more of the regulating occurs. However, we ask our IDS team to look at capital projects to make sure that we are in fact meeting our own standards. And then lastly, I would just simply add that, please help us be successful, because our goal with capital projects is to set an example. We want to be a shining example for the development community to follow. We are building the infrastructure of our community. I personally am so proud of the work we do, but again, we can always do better. And I'll just close and maybe a negative comment, but we are never looking to, seek exceptions to our codes, our policy documents. Again, we are seeking to be a shining example of how to do it.
Thank you, Rick. So we are at 1 minute after 12 o'clock, and there was definitely a few different requests or suggestions that were discussed. So City Manager Clifton, I'm curious if we want to assign some homework for people to consider those criteria for prioritization, considering the capital projects, and then me reviewing some of those requests and whether or not they're in support of some of those requests before we adjourn. Does that sound okay to you?
That sounds just fine to me. I think homework would be great, and thanks. And it's not surprising that we're butting up against the hour. These are very important topics today, so thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to review some of the requests, and at this time, instead of having further discussion on them, it's just for you to consider questions you might have about these and whether or not you're in support of these, okay? So, and then also to let me know if I missed one. So the number one I had was a request to consider funding designs for the bike ped projects that was around $550,000. Another one was a request to prioritize Milton when it came to the bike and ped projects. And again, correct me if I got it wrong. Okay, another one was a request to reconsider the funds when it came to the broadband, and yet we had a discussion about sort of equity with education and healthcare. So is that something you still want to push forward?
Can I just clarify?
Yes, clarify, please.
I don't want anybody to interpret my comments that I'm against broadband development. My point was that we should prioritize all projects together. It kind of seems like we're keeping the bond discussion over here and the general discussion over here. And what my point is that we need to bring those two things together. And it's not that I'm for or against anything in particular. I just want to have a rational discussion of priorities on how we can use this federal funding with priorities being on things that we absolutely need. For instance, some of the wastewater treatment plant, radios for policemen and things that if we can use federal funds for those things, we should do it, not bother the voters with it.
Okay, so in summary, Councilmember McCarthy, so rather than rethinking about how those ARPA funds are necessarily being used in that particular process or project, what you're recommending is that we really think about our criteria for prioritizing these projects rather than thinking about them as separate fund buckets, first of all. Is that what I understand?
I think that summarizes it pretty well. Thank you.
Okay.
I just
Yes,
note
Mayor
that-
Deasy.
that I'm not very interested in going back to the ARPA fund discussion, and just note that some of that money has already been allocated for other grant opportunities, like the 1.5 for broadband was what we used to apply for the current broadband grant that could get us a full $11.5 million.
And I also respect that we don't want to go back and redo what we already did.
Yeah, so I hear your request is actually different than maybe what I originally understood. So again, that homework is about the criteria for prioritizing these projects so that you can come back and discuss and actually come to the consensus on the criteria. And it sounded like one of the suggestions of the criteria was high need in maintaining non-optional functionality, right? Things like wastewater, right? Okay. And then there was a discussion or a request, and you have to forgive me if I misunderstood, from Councilmember Shimoni about reconsidering the roundabout in favor of a protected intersection. And my understanding from Rick was that it's not an option because of due to some contracts and things already in motion. So I just want to make sure I understand that as we move forward and that there's clarity there. Is that correct?
Katie, if I can jump in.
Yes, Councilmember Shimoni.
Thank you. I think what I heard from Rick is it is an option, but I don't think there's political will, is what I'm hearing.
Okay.
We didn't have a majority in support of re-looking at that project for their discussion.
Okay, so then considering that it was a project that was put on the table by Councilmember Shimoni, everyone then needs to understand where they stand on that project if it comes up again, and if there isn't support on it, that is brought about when this discussion continues. Okay, so that is all I had. Is there something I'm missing in regards to what was put onto the table that would want further consideration?
I'll just say that the homework of how we want to prioritize funds is going to be an important thing to send to city manager. We don't need to go over it now, but send it as we will have the budget session in April, because I definitely have certain thoughts on how we should be prioritizing at 30,000 feet.
Yes.
So, but let's send that to Clifton and we'll address that at the budget session.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you for that direction. Are there anything else that I missed that was put on the table?
Katie, can I jump in?
Yes, Councilmember Shimoni.
Thank you. I think in my little list that I provided, Milton was one example, but there's about 4 other projects as well, and I can list them out, but I won't belabor us and do that. And I just wanted to add that, Katie, and I do have a closing comment when that's appropriate. Thank you.
I think now would be a good time for that closing comment.
Okay, very good. So, I just gonna take a minute here. I really was hoping we'd have more discussion, city manager and council here, rather than just, a lot of presentations. And I'm hoping maybe in April, we can set aside more time for council to discuss. I think we were just starting to get into a really good conversation, council. And I don't feel like we reached closure. And honestly, it's frustrating to me. I do feel frustrated right now. And I own that. Council, we've declared a climate emergency. And if we want to actually reach climate, neutrality by 2030, we need to take action. The status quo is not going to work. And the CNP and the ATMP further define our regional plan goals that are outlined. And our 5-year CIP is really important. I'll just say that, I think that we had a good conversation today, but I'd like to have more. And I see your cameras on, city manager. I'll turn it over to you in a second here. And just say, in closing that, Councilmember Aslan, I appreciate the compliment you gave me. But like you said, I'm on my way out. And so I'm really trying to do my best to set us up for success, council. And with your support, I think we can do that with staff and leadership. But if we just stick to the status quo, we're going to fall short. Thank you.
Thank you, council member. Yeah, real fast, and not to belabor or give unnecessary response to that. I sense your frustration, but here's the deal. We're never going to have these discussions without having them be fully informed. And one of the purposes today was to let council know and let the community know, frankly, everything that's on the table. We cannot isolate one thing and spend an entire retreat talking about it. All of this stuff interconnects. And you saw that today. We can't talk about new transportation corridors without talking about zoning, without talking about housing, which we didn't talk about today, without talking about water needs, wastewater needs, and all of the other things. They all meld together. And it's always going to be an informed discussion. And I'm sorry you don't feel like you had enough time. My observation, council member, is I thought you had a lot of airtime today and clearly articulated your concerns and your viewpoints, and I think they're greatly appreciated. But I don't know what else I can say to try to alleviate your concerns. I think we did what we could, and I know we did what we were asked to do. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, City Manager Clifton. And I also want to say that I apologize also, Councilmember Shimoni, because I'm the taskmaster who has kept trying to move people along as I'm just trying to get us into that timing. But hopefully some of this homework will help cause those next conversations to be on point and clear, because I do think that you were very clear and concise with your comments as far as what you were thinking. So I really appreciate that. And I just want to remind everyone that we're all here in the same room for the same reasons. That though we might have different ideas on how we accomplish these things, that we actually all care deeply about the thriving of our community and its members, and that we're all on the same page there. And so remembering that will help us to be open-minded and curious and support each other as we move forward, knowing that some amount of having to shake off not getting everything we want will be in place, but also trying to make sure that we are always trying to approach it with a big picture and support each other's concerns as they come in. So I just really want to appreciate all of you for doing that today, and because I know these are hard and difficult conversations, but that you are all amazing people who are everyone in this room and online here to support the thriving of our community. So with that, I'd love to say thank you. At this point, City Manager, or maybe it's Mayor, do we adjourn? Yeah, thank you.
Do we have anyone for public participation? We do not.
Okay.
All right, with that meeting adjourned.
Thank you, Mayor.
Katie.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. You did a great job.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you all, and have a great day.